The evening light was fading, casting long shadows that intertwined with the creeping darkness inside. Alara adjusted the strap of her satchel and stepped through the heavy oak doors, the groan of ancient hinges echoing through the cavernous interior. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and leather, a perfume that instantly enveloped her senses. Towering shelves stretched endlessly upward, their wooden beams creaking softly as if whispering secrets of centuries past. Alara's footsteps were muffled by the thick carpet of faded Persian rugs, worn smooth in places by generations of hurried scholars. She had been drawn here not by assignment or obligation, but by a restless curiosity that gnawed at her since her first day at the university. The library, neglected and shrouded in mystery, was rumored among students to be a place where the boundaries of knowledge blurred, where some claimed the books themselves held more than ink and paper, that they were alive, capable of changing their own stories. Skepticism had always tempered Ilarore's imagination. She was a scholar, after all, trained to seek evidence and logic. Yet tonight, as she ran her fingers along the spines of the books, she was struck by an odd sensation. The titles seemed to shimmer, the letters faintly shifting beneath her touch. She paused, focusing intently on a particular volume, an ancient leather-bound book whose cover was cracked and fragile. Opening it carefully, Alara's eyes scanned the printed words, but they did not remain static. Paragraphs subtly altered, sentences rearranged themselves as if responding to her gaze. The words danced on the page, forming new meanings, new narratives. A chill ran down her spine. She pulled the book closer to the flickering candlelight on the table and began to read. The tome was filled with cryptic symbols and coded passages, a cipher that seemed to shimmer between languages and eras. Alara's heart quickened. Her years of studying literature and ancient scripts had prepared her for many things, but nothing like this. Hours passed unnoticed as she transcribed the shifting text, piecing together fragments that hinted at crimes yet to occur. The cipher was a map of futures, grim, violent, inevitable. Her breath caught when one prediction described a murder on campus, with details so precise they could only have been written by someone who had seen the event unfold. But what chilled her most was the final entry, a description so vivid and personal it could only be about her. The heavy footsteps of librarian Marlowe approached, breaking the silence. He was a tall, thin man with silver-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the library's secrets. His voice was low and cautious. "You should not be here alone at this hour, Miss Whitlock. The library is not as it seems." Alara looked up, the candlelight catching the intensity in her gaze. "The books, they're changing, and there's a cipher predicting crimes, including one about me." Marlowe's expression darkened, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. "Some stories are not meant to be read, much less changed. You tread on dangerous ground." Determined, Alara closed the tome with a resolute snap. "Then I have to understand, before it's too late." As she left the table, the library seemed to shift again, shadows lengthening and twisting as if the building itself was alive, watching her every move. Alara's mind raced. Questions spiraled, fears deepened, but beneath it all, a stubborn hope burned bright. She would unravel the cipher's secrets or be consumed by them trying. The shifting pages whispered promises of dark truths and perilous knowledge, and Alara knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere within the labyrinth of the rewriting books lay the key to her survival, if she could find it in time. And so, with the weight of unseen eyes upon her, Ilara stepped deeper into the library's shadows, the first page of her own story turning inexorably toward an uncertain fate. The afternoon sun filtered through the fractured colors, casting shifting patterns across her open notebook where the cipher sprawled in meticulous script. Around her, the great stone halls echoed with the faint rustle of pages turning, whispered footsteps, and the distant hum of a world that seemed oblivious to the strange phenomena she was uncovering. She had spent hours poring over the ancient tome she'd found the day before, the cryptic symbols dancing just beyond easy comprehension. Yet patterns began to emerge. Certain sequences repeated with variations, hinting at a code layered within the text that was rewriting itself. It wasn't merely a set of predictions, it was a living narrative, adapting, shifting, and Ilara suspected, responding to something unseen. Her fingers traced the delicate ink lines as she wrote out the cipher's fragments, every so often glancing up at the shelves around her. There was an unsettling sensation, as if the library itself was watching. Ilara shook the feeling away and settled back into her work. A sudden soft creak of footsteps startled her. From the corner of her eye, she spotted librarian Marlowe. He stood at the edge of the stacks, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that sent a chill through her. The man was an enigma, his exact age impossible to gauge, his presence both a comfort and a threat. Known as the gatekeeper of the library, Marlowe was the embodiment of its secrets. His dark robes seemed to absorb the light, and the ivory-masked symbol etched on the ring he wore caught what little light there was, gleaming faintly as he adjusted his spectacles. Ilara's pulse quickened. Was it mere coincidence, or was Marlowe monitoring her progress? She closed her notebook slowly, not wanting to draw attention, and rose to leave. As she turned, Marlowe's eyes seemed to pierce through her, unreadable and cold. Outside the stacks, the tension did not ease. Jasper Lang, a fellow literature student and her academic rival, awaited her in the common room. His skeptical gaze met hers as she entered, the murmur of other students fading as he stepped forward. "Whitlock," he began, voice low but carrying enough to draw curious glances, still chasing ghosts in those old books. Ilara's jaw tightened. "It's more than ghosts, Jasper. There's a cipher, a code predicting crimes. You wouldn't understand." Jasper smirked, crossing his arms. "Sounds like paranoia to me. You're letting your imagination run wild." The challenge was clear, and the room's atmosphere thickened. Ilara felt the sting of isolation but met his gaze steadily. "If you think this is fantasy, prove me wrong." Their verbal duel attracted a small crowd, stoking the embers of rivalry that had been smoldering since their first year. Ilara felt the weight of skepticism pressing in but refused to back down. Later, in a small cafe near campus, Ilara met with Mina Solis, her closest ally and a student activist with a sharp mind for technology. The cramped space buzzed with the hiss of the espresso machine and the clink of cups, a mundane backdrop to their extraordinary discussion. "I ran some background checks on the digital archives," Mina whispered, sliding her laptop across the table. "There are files about the library's history that have been edited, like someone's tampering with the records themselves." Ilara leaned in, heart pounding. "So it's not just the books. The whole narrative is shifting." Mina nodded, her bright eyes serious. "We need to be careful. If the librarian is involved, we're up against more than just a secret society." Together, they pored over the data, their alliance a fragile beacon against the encroaching shadows. Back at the library, Ilara felt the weight of unseen eyes. The cipher's whispers grew louder, and with every page that shifted, the past and future blurred further. Suspicion of Marlowe hardened into conviction. She had to uncover the truth behind the gatekeeper's cryptic presence. But as tensions with Jasper mounted and her circle of trust narrowed, Alara realized she was stepping deeper into a labyrinth of secrets, where every answer only led to more questions. Could she decipher the cipher before it was too late? Or was the library's rewriting narrative already sealing her fate? The shadows lengthened, and the whispering books awaited her next move. Alara Whitlock's breath fogged faintly in the dim light as she carefully opened the brittle pages of a manuscript she'd stumbled upon, one that seemed to shimmer faintly with an otherworldly aura. Her eyes narrowed behind round glasses, tracing the delicate lines of an illustration, an ivory mask, its expression serene yet unnervingly blank, carved with intricate symbols that matched the cryptic cipher she had been obsessing over. A sudden noise made her start. The soft footsteps of someone approaching echoed in the cavernous hall. She quickly hid the manuscript beneath a pile of innocuous books as Professor Alden Grey emerged from the shadows, his tall, gaunt frame casting an imposing silhouette. His silver hair caught the faint light, and his piercing blue eyes seemed to bore into her very soul. "Alara," he said quietly, his voice low yet urgent, "some knowledge is a poison disguised as a cure. You must understand what you seek can unravel more than just mysteries." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine, the warning heavy with unspoken threats. "I need to know," she whispered, clutching the manuscript closer. "If the Ivory cult controls the rewriting, then I have to stop them." Professor Gray's gaze softened for a moment. "Be wary. The cult is not merely a secret society. It is the guardian of a narrative older than this university itself. They believe in predestination, in the story already written. To challenge them is to challenge fate." The words hung in the air as he retreated silently into the shadows, leaving Alara alone with a swelling sense of dread. She glanced around the darkened aisles, the silence broken only by the faint rustling of pages shifting on their own. It was as if the library itself was watching, waiting. Later, as she wandered the narrow corridors, Alara's senses heightened. Every creak of the wooden floor, every whisper of wind through cracked windows seemed amplified, feeding her paranoia. She felt eyes on her, hidden behind the countless stacks of books. The ivory masks she had glimpsed in the manuscript seemed to manifest in the shadows, symbols of control and manipulation. Her fingers brushed a carved symbol on a wooden bookshelf, its ivory sheen gleaming faintly in the gloom. The same symbol was etched into the margins of the ancient tome she had found days before. It was a signature, a mark of the cult's presence. Alaros' mind raced. The cult's reach was vast, their influence woven into the very fabric of the library and the university. They were watching her, anticipating her moves. Yet, as fear curled in her chest, it was tempered by determination. She could not turn back now. That night, she sat in her small dorm room, the manuscript open before her. The cipher's characters seemed to swim and shift, rewriting themselves again. The final crime, the one that chilled her to the bone, loomed closer, with every line she deciphered. But with the cult's shadow creeping over her every step, Alara understood that knowledge was both her weapon and her curse. A knock at the door startled her. Mina Solis, ever energetic and loyal, slipped inside with a reassuring smile. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Alara forced a smile. "Something like that. I've found references to the Ivory Culture group behind this rewriting, and Gray warned me to be careful." Mina's eyes darkened with concern. "Then we need a plan. You're not alone in this." Together, they pored over the manuscripts, their whispered conversations mingling with the distant echoes of the shifting books. Outside, the library seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The boundary between past and present blurring, the story rewriting itself with each passing moment. Alara knew the path ahead was perilous. The ivory cult's mask concealed countless faces, and trust was a fragile commodity. Yet, beneath the weight of dread, a spark of hope flickered. If she could unravel the cult's secrets, perhaps she could rewrite her own fate before the final page was sealed. The library's shadows deepened, and the ivory mask watched silently, waiting to see who would hold the pen next. The air smelled faintly of aged paper and dust, a scent that Alara Whitlock had come to associate with both comfort and creeping unease. She sat hunched over an ancient tome, its leather cover cracked and brittle, the pages yellowed and delicate. But as she read, the words began to shift beneath her gaze. The tale of a long-forgotten war melted away like mist, replaced by a cryptic prophecy that spoke of shadows creeping from the ivory halls. Alara blinked, her heart pounding. Was she imagining it? She closed the book, only to reopen it moments later. The text was different again, each reading revealing a new layer of the same enigmatic story. The library around her seemed to breathe with the same unreliability. Shelves groaned softly, and distant footsteps echoed without source. The library was no longer just a sanctuary of knowledge. It was a living entity, unpredictable and alive. Alara's fingers trembled as she reached for her notebook, scribbling frantic annotations, trying to fix something fluid into permanence. Later, nestled in a shadowed alcove, she found Mina Solis waiting, her auburn curls pulled back loosely, eyes sharp and expectant. Mina had been the steady presence throughout Ilara's unraveling reality. "It's happening again," Ilara whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft rustling of pages. The text's there changing. Not just small errors or edits, but whole narratives twisting and reforming. Mina leaned closer, her expression serious yet encouraging. "We'll figure it out." Together, they spread out books and notes between them, a chaotic mosaic of clues and cipher fragments. Mina's fingers danced over her tablet, cross-referencing digital archives with the mutable texts before them. As they worked, the library seemed to grow darker, shadows creeping along the walls like living ink. Alara's mind raced. The shifting texts were no accident. Someone or something was orchestrating the changes. The Ivory cult, with their obsession for narrative control, suddenly felt more real and menacing than ever. The weight of predestination pressed down on her, threatening to crush the fragile hope she clung to. When a sudden breeze fluttered the pages of an open book, revealing a hidden passage that spoke of threads of fate pulled by ivory hands, Alara gasped. The cult's influence had seeped into the very fabric of history recorded in these books. The lines between past, present, and future blurred terrifyingly. Exhausted but resolute, Alara looked to Mina. "We have to stop them. If the books keep changing, if history is rewritten by their hand, no one will be safe." Mina nodded, her eyes steady. "Then we fight back one page at a time." As twilight deepened, the shifting narratives of the library pressed in on Ilara's consciousness. But amid the disorienting flux, a new determination ignited, a fierce resolve to reclaim her story and rewrite her fate. The battle for truth had only just begun. The walls whispered secrets, and somewhere deep within the labyrinth of books, the Ivory cult watched, waiting for the next move. And Alara, heart pounding, knew that every word she read, every cipher she cracked, was a step closer to a destiny she was desperate to change. But could she trust the words that told her story when the pages themselves refused to stay still? The library's shadows lengthened, and the shifting lines beckoned her forward into the unknown. The smell of dust and old parchment was thick in the air, mingling with the faint metallic scent of the iron hinges enclosing the library's restricted section. Her breath came shallow and rapid, fingers trembling slightly as they traced the carefully inscribed cipher symbols that now felt less like script and more like a map to impending doom. For hours she had pored over the cryptic sequences, the patterns twisting and folding upon themselves, much like the labyrinthine corridors of the crumbling university library around her. Each symbol unlocked a new fragment of a violent prophecy, the latest decoded segment spelling out a crime so brutal and immediate it sent a shiver of cold dread racing down her spine. The timing was no coincidence. Alara's gaze darted toward the calendar pinned to her desk. The predicted date was only days away. A deep, insistent pulse of urgency thrummed through her veins. This was no longer an academic puzzle. It was a looming catastrophe that threatened to unfold amidst the unsuspecting campus. Yet the burden of this knowledge weighed heavily on her. The more she delved into the cipher, the more isolated she became. Jasper Lang, her academic rival and skeptic, had grown increasingly vocal in his dismissal of her findings. Their last encounter in the bustling student cafe had been acrimonious, Jasper's sharp tongue slicing through the ambient chatter as he challenged her with biting skepticism. "Alara, you're chasing shadows," he had snapped, eyes glittering with incredulity. "This cipher nonsense reeks of desperation and fantasy. You're letting obsession cloud your judgment." Her retort had been equally fierce, but beneath the bravado, a fissure had cracked open between them. Jasper's disbelief was a wedge driving them apart, and Alara sensed the subtle but undeniable shift in their dynamic. The rivalry that once spurred her now threatened to sever a crucial thread of support. Late into the night, Alara found solace in the company of Mina Solis. In the cramped dorm room, bathed in the cold blue glow of a laptop screen, the two friends sifted through digital archives, Mina's nimble fingers dancing over the keys as she unearthed hidden clues that might connect the cipher's ominous predictions to actual campus events. "There," Mina whispered, pointing at a series of encrypted messages buried deep within the university's network. These could be communications between cult members. Ilara's heart pounded. Every new discovery tightened the noose of urgency around them, yet also illuminated a fragile path forward. Mina's loyalty was a lifeline, a beacon of hope amid the encroaching shadows. But outside, in the vast silence of the library's mezzanine, an unblinking presence observed. A figure cloaked in shadow lingered quietly, the faint creak of aged floorboards betraying their vigil. The ivory mask glinted faintly in the pale moonlight filtering through stained glass, a silent reminder of the ivory cult's ever-watchful eyes. Ilara left the library unaware of the gaze that followed her, the echo of footsteps swallowed by the cavernous space. Paranoia tightened its grip, threading through every whispered corner of her mind. The cipher's edge had cut deep, thrusting Elara into a perilous dance with fate. Each step forward brought new revelations, but also new dangers. How could she unravel the final threads of this deadly tapestry before the violent crime came to pass? And at what cost to herself and those she held dear? As dawn broke over the ancient spires of the university, Alara sat at her desk, the cipher spread before her like an open wound. The final pieces awaited, and so did the unknown enemy lurking just beyond the page. Her fingers tightened around the pen, poised to write her next move in a story that was no longer hers to control, but one she was determined to rewrite. The air was thick with the scent of aged parchment and dust, curling around her like a shroud. Her heart pounded with a mixture of dread and determination as she approached the secluded alcove where Professor Alden Grey had agreed to meet. The flickering candlelight cast long, trembling shadows across the ancient stone walls, and the silence was punctuated only by the faint rustle of pages and the occasional creak of the old building settling. Professor Grey stood waiting, his tall, gaunt frame silhouetted against the towering shelves of forgotten manuscripts. His silver hair caught the glow of the candles, framing his angular face and piercing blue eyes that seemed to hold centuries of secrets. He gestured to a worn leather chair, and Alara sat, clutching the cipher-laden tome to her chest. "You asked to speak with me," Alara began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to understand, how much do you know about the Ivory cult?" Grey's gaze held a flicker of something unreadable before he spoke, his voice low and measured. "The Ivory cult is more than a secret society. It is a belief system, a philosophy rooted in the certainty of fate and the immutability of history. They see the rewriting books as instruments of destiny, tools to shape the narrative of time itself." Elara's eyes narrowed. "And your role in all this?" The professor's lips twitched in what might have been a sad smile. "I am a guardian of knowledge, but also a prisoner of it. My past is entwined with theirs, though I have sought distance. Yet, the web is vast, and the strands are difficult to sever." His cryptic words left Elara with more questions than answers, but time was a luxury she did not have. She pressed on, desperation edging her tone. "How do I stop this? How do I break the cycle?" Grey's eyes darkened. "To challenge fate is to challenge the very foundation of the universe's narrative. The cost is unimaginable, and the consequences ripple beyond this library's walls." Before Elara could reply, a sudden noise startled them, both a soft shuffle from the corridor outside. Grey's expression sharpened. "Be cautious, Elara. The shadows move more swiftly than you realize. Trust no one entirely." Later that evening, Elara found herself confiding in Mina Solis within the cramped study room, bathed in the glow of a single desk lamp. Mina's usual lively energy was subdued, her fingers nervously twisting a strand of auburn hair. "There's something I haven't told you," Mina admitted, her voice trembling. "I've known more about the cult's presence here than I let on. I feared what it might mean for you, for us." Ilara's breath hitched. "Why didn't you say anything?" Tears welled in Mina's eyes. "I wanted to protect you. I thought I could handle it alone, but it's bigger than I imagined." The betrayal stung sharper than any wound, slicing through the fragile trust they'd built. Ilara's mind raced, tangled in webs of suspicion and hurt. The line between friend and foe blurred dangerously. In the solitude of her dormitory, Elara pored over the cipher fragments strewn across her desk. The silence pressed upon her, a heavy, suffocating weight, broken only by the distant hum of the university at night. She traced the intricate patterns of the code, seeking order in the chaos, a way to rewrite the story before it sealed her fate. Every revelation, every betrayal deepened the labyrinth of uncertainty surrounding her. The Ivory cult's influence was pervasive, seeping into every corner of her world. Yet, within the storm of deceit and paranoia, a fierce resolve kindled in her chest. She would fight not just to survive, but to reclaim the narrative of her own life. The chapter closed with Elara standing before the ancient stained glass window in the library's heart. The fractured light cast kaleidoscopic patterns across the floor, mirroring the fractured trust and tangled truths that enveloped her. She inhaled deeply, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future converging in her steady gaze. "This story isn't finished," she whispered to the shifting shadows. "Not yet." Outside, the wind stirred the brittle leaves, carrying with it the echoes of betrayal and the faintest glimmer of hope. Her fingers trembled slightly, tracing the delicate edges of a leather-bound ledger that had belonged to her mother. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the cracked pages, as if the very library itself were whispering secrets meant only for her to hear. Ilara's heart pounded with a mix of reverence and unease. Each letter and scrawled note hinted at a life entwined with mysteries she was only beginning to comprehend. The ledger contained entries from decades past, dates, cryptic symbols, and references to meetings in places no longer marked on any map. Her breath caught when she found a notation in a hurried hand, mentioning a gathering of the keepers and a warning about the shifting stories beneath the ivory gaze. Her mind raced back to the tales she had uncovered about the Ivory cult, the shadowy society rumored to wield control over the library's uncanny power. Could her parents have been involved? The question clawed at her, pushing her to delve deeper despite the gnawing fear that some truths might be better left buried. A sudden creak echoed through the silent hall. Ilara froze, senses sharpening. From the corner of her eye, a figure emerged, a tall, gaunt silhouette, framed by the dim glow of the overhead sconces. Professor Alden Gray's piercing blue eyes met hers with a mixture of warning and sorrow. "Ilara," he murmured, his voice low and tight. "There are paths in this library that no student should tread. Your parents' past is a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. Be cautious, some knowledge exacts a terrible price." She met his gaze steadily, the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. "I have to know, Professor. If the cipher means anything, it's telling me that my parents' story is part of the cycle I'm trying to break." Gray's lips pressed into a thin line, then tread carefully. "The Ivory cult watches closely, and the library's forgotten wings hold truths that have been buried for good reason." Determined, Ilara sought out Mina Solis, whose unwavering loyalty had become her anchor in the shifting tides of paranoia and deception. Together, they navigated the labyrinthine corridors behind a false bookshelf, the cold stone walls closing in as their footsteps whispered against the granite floor. "Look here," Mina whispered, pointing to a faded inscription barely visible beneath layers of dust. "This marks the entrance to the restricted section, forgotten wings that even the librarians avoid." Ilara's pulse quickened. The cipher's hints about missing passages and blank spaces suddenly made sense. Those unwritten pages were not mere omissions, but deliberate erasures, concealing the cult's most guarded secrets. As they pressed forward, the shadows seemed to thicken, the air growing colder and heavier. Ilara's thoughts flickered to the faded note she had found earlier, tucked inside a hollowed-out volume. The trembling handwriting had urged her onward, promising revelation but warning of peril. "We're close," she said, voice steady despite the chill crawling up her spine. "My parents' fate, the cult's origins, the cipher, all of it converges here." The forgotten wings beckoned like a maw of shadow and history, a place where the past and present intertwined in a dangerous dance. Somewhere within those depths waited the answers Ilara sought, answers that might finally illuminate the path to breaking the cycle, or bind her more tightly to the fate the books had cruelly inscribed. Outside, the library's ancient clock tolled mournfully, marking the passage of time that now seemed to slip through Ilara's fingers like sand. Each moment brought her closer to the precipice, where knowledge and destiny collided in a fragile balance. Her footsteps echoed in the silence, a steady rhythm of resolve and dread as she stepped into the unknown. chasing the fading footprints of a past long obscured, hoping to rewrite the story before the final page was sealed. The shadows shifted around her, and somewhere deep within the library's heart, the rewriting books stirred, as if aware that a new chapter was about to begin. Alara Whitlock sat near the back, her round glasses slipping down her nose as she fidgeted with a loose thread on her sleeve. Across the room, Jasper Lang stood confidently near the podium, his sharp eyes scanning the room until they locked on hers. A ripple of anticipation passed through the crowd. This was no ordinary class discussion. Today, Jasper was poised to challenge her, publicly and unrelentingly. Clearing his throat, Jasper began with polished ease. While I admire Ilara's enthusiasm for literary mysteries, her recent claims about a cipher predicting future crimes seem at best speculative and, at worst, a dangerous distraction from real scholarship. His voice echoed clearly, slicing through the quiet like a blade. He paced slightly, gesturing as if conducting an invisible orchestra. The idea that books rewrite themselves and foretell events is nothing more than fanciful superstition, unsupported by any tangible evidence. A few students chuckled. Others exchanged uncertain glances. Alara felt the familiar sting of embarrassment, but beneath it stirred a fierce flame of resolve. She rose slowly, steadying her voice as she replied, "Jasper, skepticism is healthy, but dismissing the cipher without engaging with the evidence does a disservice to all of us. The texts may be unstable, but the patterns within the cipher are consistent and verifiable." Jasper smirked, unshaken. Patterns or coincidences? I challenge you to produce proof beyond cryptic symbols and vague predictions. The room seemed to close in around her, the weight of dozens of eyes pressing down. Yet Ilara's mind raced. This was exactly the challenge she needed to sharpen her focus. After class, she retreated to the library's shadowed alcove, the scent of aged paper and dust enveloping her like a familiar cloak. Fingers tracing the brittle edges of the ancient tome, she whispered to herself, "I will find the proof." Meanwhile, Mina Solis sat hunched over a bank of glowing computer screens in the cramped study room of the student union. Her short, curly auburn hair caught the blue light as she scanned lines of encrypted code, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "Alara," she called softly into the phone, "you won't believe what I found. There are hidden files in the library's digital archive's encrypted layers beneath the usual catalogue. They reference the cipher and mention key dates and names linked to the cult." Ilara's breath caught. "Can you decrypt them?" Mina's voice was charged with excitement. "I'm working on it. These files could explain how the rewriting started, or who's behind it." That night, the two met in the library's dim confines, voices low amid the towering shelves. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows, dancing over the pages of both ancient manuscripts and glowing screens. Each revelation deepened the mystery, but also the danger. The lines between friend and foe blurred, and the stakes rose higher than ever. "We're onto something," Alara said, eyes shining with a mixture of fear and hope. "But Jasper's challenge means we can't afford mistakes." Mina nodded, fingers poised over the keyboard. "Then, let's prove them all wrong." As the night stretched on, the shifting narratives of the books seemed to pulse in tandem with their heartbeat, the library itself a living enigma waiting to be unraveled. And Alara knew that the next moves in this deadly game would decide not just her fate, but the very nature of reality itself. The chapter closes with the echo of footsteps approaching in the darkened stacks, an unknown watcher, perhaps, or a new ally. The game, it seemed, was far from over. Alara moved with careful steps, her breathing shallow as the aged floorboards creaked softly beneath her. The air was thick with the scent of must and dust, a tangible weight pressing against her chest. She clutched the ancient tome close to her, its cryptic cipher still vivid in her mind, but tonight her focus was elsewhere. Tonight, she pursued a lead that had tugged at her curiosity ever since Professor Gray's cryptic warnings. The whispered rumors of a clandestine gathering deep within the library. Her fingers brushed against the spines of countless leather-bound books as she navigated the labyrinthian corridors, the walls seeming to close in with every step. Somewhere beyond a rustling curtain, muffled voices echoed soft, rhythmic murmurs that sent a chill racing down her spine. Ilara paused, heart hammering, and pressed herself against the cold stone wall. Through a narrow gap, she glimpsed a chamber bathed in a dim orange glow, where a circle of figures stood cloaked in black robes. Ivory masks, glimming, ornate, and unsettling, covered their faces. Each mask bore intricate carvings of twisting vines and ancient symbols, their polished surfaces reflecting the wavering candle flames. The figures moved with an eerie synchronicity, their voices rising in a low chant that reverberated through the chamber's vaulted ceiling. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. This was no mere secret society. This was the Ivory Cult, the shadowy puppeteers she had only dared suspect. Frozen, she watched as one figure stepped forward, raising a hand. The chant faltered, replaced by a tense silence. Ilara's eyes darted to the far side of the room, and there, unmasked but cloaked in shadow, stood Professor Alden Gray. His piercing blue eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his gaunt features. Was it warning, regret, or something darker? The sudden noise of a book falling to the floor broke the spell. Ilara started, a sharp breath escaping as several heads turned toward her hiding place. Panic surged, but before she could move, a tall figure emerged from the shadows. Librarian Marlowe, his sharp features barely visible beneath a hood, gestured for silence. Without a word, the cult members began to disperse, slipping silently into hidden exits. Ilara retreated quickly, her heart pounding as she navigated the twisting passages back toward the library's main hall. The reality of what she had witnessed settled heavily on her shoulders. The Ivory Cult was no mere legend. It was alive, active, and dangerously close. Her suspicions about Professor Gray and Librarian Marlowe now hung like a guillotine over her trust. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp, a biting contrast to the oppressive warmth within. Ilara pulled her coat tighter, the weight of the ivory masks etched into her mind. The library's secrets were darker and more tangled than she had imagined, and the circle of trust she once relied upon had begun to fracture. She knew one thing with dreadful certainty. The cult's influence was woven into the very fabric of the university, and the next move she made could change everything. But as the moon slipped behind a veil of clouds, Ilara felt a steely resolve harden inside her. If the Ivory Cult sought to control the narrative of history, then she would become the author of her own story, no matter the cost. Her journey into the shadows was only just beginning. Tonight, more than ever, Ilara Whitlock felt the unsettling pulse of change beneath the venerable shelves. The whispered conversations of pages turning themselves, rearranging, rewriting. She sat at the long oak table, the candle flickering low, casting shadows that danced like specters across the ancient tome before her. The words on the page were not as she had left them. Sentences blurred and reformed, paragraphs folding into new meanings, histories and stories colliding in restless transformation. Ilara's breath hitched as she traced a finger along a line that dissolved beneath her touch. the letters melting into a swirling script she couldn't decipher. The familiar solidity of the written word had turned liquid, and with it, the certainty of the past began to erode. In the dim glow, the tome seemed alive, a breathing, thinking entity that toyed with truth and memory. Her pulse quickened, fingers trembling as she closed the book sharply, breaking the spell. The library's silence pressed down, but it was a silence filled with tension, the kind that prickled the skin and whispered of unseen eyes. She looked up, the air thickening, the boundary between the now and what had been beginning to blur. A soft rustle echoed from the stacks. Alara's eyes darted toward the narrow aisles, where shadows pooled like ink. Mina Solis appeared, breathless, clutching a tablet that glowed with a pale blue light. "Ilara, you need to see this," she whispered, voice urgent, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. Ilara rose, her legs unsteady but her resolve unbroken. Mina's tablet displayed lines of encrypted text, digital pages flickering erratically between timelines. Codes and images overlapped, the past bleeding into the present in a fractured mosaic. "The rewriting isn't just in the books," Mina said, pressing the device into Ilaros' hands. "It's in everything, the archives, the records, even the digital files. History itself is fracturing." Ilara swallowed hard, the weight of this revelation settling like a stone in her stomach. Then how do we trust anything? How do we know what's real? Before Mina could answer, a familiar, measured voice cut through the tense air. "Trust is the most fragile of constructs in a world where narratives shift like sand." Professor Alden Gray emerged from the shadows, his tall, gaunt frame silhouetted against the stained glass windows. His silver hair gleamed faintly, and his piercing blue eyes held a somber wisdom. "You both tread dangerous ground," he warned, his voice low and steady. "The rewriting books are not just texts. They are keys and chains. The Ivory cult uses them to manipulate fate itself. But beware. To become too entwined with the shifting narratives is to risk losing yourself entirely." Ilara met his gaze, the enormity of his words settling over her like a cold fog. "But if the past keeps changing, how can I fight for a future that might never be the same?" Professor Gray's eyes darkened. "By remembering who you are, even when the world around you forgets." Their conversation was abruptly interrupted by a soft footfall. Librarian Marlowe appeared at the corridor's mouth, a faint smile playing on his lips, lips that had rarely spoken more than a whisper. The narrow passage behind him was lined with ancient manuscripts whose titles shimmered and vanished like ghosts. The air was thick with a spectral silence, charged and chilling. "Curious, aren't we?" Marlowe's voice was a barely audible murmur, drifting like a shadow. "But be careful, Ilara. The more you unravel, the more the threads pull taut. Sometimes, the stories we chase end up chasing us." Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, a mixture of suspicion and dread curling in her gut. Was Marlowe friend or foe, ally or obstacle? The library itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her next move. As the night deepened, Ilara found herself caught in a labyrinth of shifting truths. Memories, once clear and steady, now flickered like fragmented images, her sense of self fraying at the edges. The rewriting books had begun to seep beyond their pages, altering not only history but the very fabric of reality. Yet, amid the chaos, a fierce determination blazed within her. If the past was malleable, if narratives could be fractured and rewritten, then perhaps the future was not set in stone. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could carve a path through the shifting shadows and reclaim her story. But the question lingered, haunting and insistent. How could she discern the true past when the records of history were so fluid, so manipulated? And if she could not trust her own memories, how could she trust anything at all? The library loomed around her, a vast, crumbling cathedral of knowledge and secrets. Somewhere within its shifting aisles lay the answers or the traps. And Alara knew that tonight, more than ever, every step forward was a step into the unknown. The fragile line between reality and narrative was breaking, and on the other side, the truth waited, or the end. Alara closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her scattered courage. The story was still unfolding, and she would be its author or its victim. With a soft sigh, she reopened her eyes, the candlelight steady once more. The pages were shifting again, but this time she was ready to confront them. The last word would not be written without her. The candle's small, flickering flame cast long, restless shadows that danced across the walls lined with towering shelves, each packed with tomes that seemed alive in their silent mutability. Before her lay the cipher, pages yellowed and fragile, yet pulsing with a strange vitality, as if the ink itself breathed with a secret will. Her fingers traced the cryptic symbols that had become both her obsession and her curse, each line presenting a riddle, each phrase a whisper from a future yet unwritten, or perhaps already written and waiting to be revealed. The silence around her was thick but never empty. It hummed with the subtle shifts of the books, the faint rustle of unseen pages turning, rewriting, rearranging their own stories in ways that defied reason. Ilara's mind raced, tangled in the relentless tension between the cipher's cold prophecies and the flickering hope that she might somehow bend the narrative to her will. The latest revelation chilled her. The cipher did not merely predict crimes, it tethered them to an unyielding fate, as if the future were carved in stone, and she was destined to play her part. Her breath caught when she reread the passage that pointed directly to her own death, the final crime foretold. The words felt like chains tightening round her soul. Yet, beneath the dread, a stubborn ember of defiance ignited. She would not be a passive victim of this story. If the books could rewrite their pasts and futures, then perhaps she could rewrite hers too. The soft click of footsteps drew her attention. Mina Solis appeared, her auburn curls catching the dim light, eyes bright with concern and determination. "Alara," she whispered, sliding into the seat across from her, "we have to talk. This isn't just about predictions anymore. It's about control, about whether we let the story end or change it." Ilara nodded, grateful for the presence of her steadfast friend. "I've been thinking the same, but how? The cipher feels like a chain, binding everything to a predetermined outcome. What if fate is stronger than our will?" Mina's voice dropped to a fierce whisper. "Then we break the chain. We fight the story it's trying to tell us." Their conversation swirled around the library's ancient stones, a mix of skepticism and hope. They debated the nature of fate as the stained glass windows filtered the dying light into fractured colors, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the worn floor. The library itself seemed to lean in, listening. Before Elara could respond, a tall figure emerged from the shadows, Professor Alden Gray. His silver hair and piercing blue eyes gave him the appearance of a spectral guardian of forbidden knowledge. He approached slowly, his voice low but firm. "Beware the temptation to rewrite what is already written," he warned. "The narrative you challenge is older and deeper than you realize. Defiance comes at a price." Alara met his gaze, the weight of his words settling like a cold fog. "I understand the risks, Professor. But I cannot accept a future where I am powerless. Gray's eyes softened for a moment. Then prepare yourself. The path you choose is fraught with shadows. As the professor retreated into the labyrinth of bookshelves, Alara felt the gravity of her decision pulling her toward the grand staircase that spiraled down into the heart of the library. She paused at the top, looking down into the dim expanse of endless knowledge and secrets. The interplay of light and shadow mirrored the crossroads within her, a choice between surrendering to the invisible forces, shaping her fate, or stepping boldly into the unknown to forge a new path. The library held its breath as Alara made her choice. With a steadying breath, she descended the stairs, each step a declaration of war against the deterministic cycle. Her mind sharpened, resolve hardening like tempered steel. She would become the author of her own story, no matter the cost. Yet, as the shadows lengthened and the ancient walls whispered warnings, a question lingered in the air. Was the narrative truly hers to rewrite, or was she merely a character trapped within a story penned by forces beyond comprehension? The answer would come soon enough, but for now, Alara clung to the fragile hope that free will could triumph over fate. The candle flickered once more, its light steadying as if in quiet solidarity. The shifting pages awaited her next move. The crossroads had been reached, and the story was poised on the edge of change. Alara Whitlock sat hunched over a cluttered table, the frayed edges of ancient manuscripts spilling over from beneath a glowing laptop screen. Beside her, Mina Solis tapped rapidly on the keyboard, her curly auburn hair falling into her eyes as she scrolled through encrypted digital archives. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and dust, the dim light casting long shadows that danced like phantoms across the cracked stone walls. "Look at this," Mina whispered, nudging the screen toward Alara. "Patterns in the cipher, they're repeating in cycles. Almost like the cults trying to trap us in a loop." Alara's round glasses caught the pale light as she leaned in, her fingers tracing the cryptic symbols. "If we can crack the pattern, maybe we can predict their next move, or better yet, rewrite it." Mina's eyes shone with fierce determination. "And we won't do it alone. We need allies." The idea was daunting, yet necessary. The Ivory cult's reach was vast, and Elara's isolation had bred a growing paranoia that gnawed at her resolve. But Mina's unyielding loyalty was a lifeline, a beacon cutting through the shadowy maze of deception. Days passed in feverish collaboration. Alara cautiously recruited a handful of trusted students, those who had shown cracks in their skepticism or whispered doubts about the university's opaque authorities. Meetings were held in secret, an empty lecture hall cloaked in darkness, the echo of whispered conversations bouncing off cold stone. Strategies were drawn, cipher fragments shared, and trust slowly stitched together in the fragile fabric of their alliance. Yet, it was the moment she stepped into Professor Alden Gray's office that the weight of their endeavor truly settled upon her shoulders. The room was a sanctuary of aged books and dim lamplight, the scent of leather and ink thick in the air. Gray sat behind his desk, his silver hair catching the faint light, eyes sharp and unreadable. "Alara," he began, voiced low and lined with urgency. "The Ivory cult is more than an academic curiosity. They believe in the inevitability of destiny control through predetermination, but their certainty is also their weakness." He slid a brittle parchment across the desk, its surface marked by cryptic symbols and fragmented text. "This is a fragment of their creed, recently uncovered. It points to a final plan, one that will seal the fate they have written for you." Alara felt a shiver course down her spine. Can it be stopped? Gray's gaze softened, but the weight of his knowledge was palpable. "That depends on whether you can rewrite the narrative before the last page is sealed." Leaving his office, Ilara's mind raced. The cult's influence tightened like a noose, yet now she had a plan and allies. Back in the library's shadowed corners, the group worked tirelessly, piecing together the cipher's secrets by day and guarding their fragile trust by night. In the stillness after midnight, Ilara often found herself alone in the library's main reading room. Moonlight spilled through the cracked stained glass windows, casting fractured colors onto the worn wooden tables. The shifting pages of her open book fluttered softly, as if alive, embodying the uncertainty of the path ahead. She pressed her palm to the cool surface of the table, drawing strength from the silent allies who now stood with her. The battle for control over the story was far from over, but for the first time, hope flickered beneath the looming dread. As the shadows lengthened and the library whispered its ancient secrets, Ilara whispered back, "We will rewrite this ending." Outside, the night held its breath. The air grew colder, heavier with the scent of dust, and something older, the musk of forgotten centuries, sealed away from the sun and prying eyes. Her heart thrummed, equal parts excitement and dread. This was the threshold she had been chasing since the cipher first whispered its secrets to her in the shifting pages. At the bottom, the passage opened into a cavernous chamber, its walls lined with shelves groaning under the weight of manuscripts older than the university itself. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows over cracked leather bindings and brittle parchment. Some manuscripts, sealed with wax emblems, she recognized from her research: the ivory mask, the cryptic sigils of the cult. Professor Alden Gray was already there, his tall, gaunt frame leaning against a massive wooden desk intricately carved with symbols that seemed to writhe beneath the candlelight. His silver hair caught the glow, and his piercing blue eyes reflected the urgency in his voice as he beckoned her closer. "This," he said, his fingers tracing a spiral pattern etched into the desk, "is the heart of the library's secret. These texts are not mere records, they are instruments. The Ivory cult discovered long ago how to manipulate time itself, not by physical means, but by rewriting narrative, history, fate, reality, all our stories that can be edited." Ilara swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling over her like a shroud. She reached out, gingerly opening one fragile manuscript. The script was faded but unmistakably ancient, a blend of cryptic ciphers and poetic incantations. The margins were filled with annotations, notes from cult members, scholars who had devoted their lives to this dangerous power. As she traced the ink with trembling fingers, the room seemed to pulse with a quiet power, a subtle shifting that echoed the very phenomenon she had witnessed in the library's upper halls. The books were alive, not in the simple sense of changing text, but as vessels of time's fluidity, bending the future and past in a dance orchestrated by the cult. A sudden movement at the chamber's entrance drew her attention. Librarian Marlowe appeared, his shadowed face inscrutable in the dim light. His eyes met hers with a silent warning, a reminder that some doors, once opened, could not be closed. "You tread on dangerous ground, Ilara." His voice was low, almost a whisper. "The library watches, and not all who guard its secrets are friends." Ilara nodded, the fragile manuscript pressed to her chest like a talisman. The knowledge she had uncovered was a double-edged sword, the key to breaking the cycle, but also a beacon that would draw the cult's gaze ever closer. Professor Gray stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "We must tread carefully. Every revelation brings us closer to the truth and to the edge of the abyss." In that hidden chamber, beneath the shifting narratives of the university library, Ilara felt the true weight of the battle ahead. The past was no longer a fixed point, the future no longer certain. Time was a story, and she held the pen, As the candle flames flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for her, Alara steeled herself. The ivory cult's grip on history was ancient and powerful, but so too was her determination to rewrite the final page. Outside, the distant rumble of an approaching storm echoed the turmoil within, the night thick with possibility and peril. And somewhere in the depths of the library's heart, the story was waiting to be changed. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time, Alara felt a fragile hope stirring amidst the shadows. The final word hung in the air, a silent promise. The narrative was unbound, but the outcome was hers to shape. The last page was not yet written, and with that, the chapter closed, but the story was only beginning. She had returned to the restricted section, drawn by an unsettling curiosity that had taken root ever since she first noticed the books rewriting themselves. Tonight, the air was thick with dust motes that danced faintly in the golden pools of lamplight. The faint scent of aged paper and binding glue mingling with the cool, damp stone walls. Her fingers traced the fragile pages with reverence, stopping abruptly as she encountered something she had never seen before. Entire sections of text were missing, not torn or damaged, but blank smooth, featureless stretches of white that seemed to shimmer faintly when caught in the lamplight. The margins around them remained detailed and crisp, the handwriting of long-dead scribes continuing up to the edges of these voids as if hesitant to cross the invisible boundary. Alara blinked and rubbed her eyes, convinced at first that exhaustion was to blame. But when she looked again, the blank spaces seemed to pulse subtly, shifting in shape and size as if alive. Her breath caught. She lifted her round glasses and peered closer, a low hum of excitement and dread rising in her chest. "Mina," she whispered urgently into her phone, the soft crackle of the call barely audible. "You need to come. I've found something different." Minutes later, Mina arrived, her short curls catching the lamplight, her eyes wide with concern and anticipation. She approached quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile tranquility of the ancient chamber. "What is it?" Mina asked in a hushed tone. Alara pointed at the blank passages. "Look, these aren't just missing pages. They're gaps, spaces where the story hasn't been written yet. I think they represent future events, things that haven't happened or been decided." Mina leaned in, fingertips tracing the edges of the voids cautiously. "You mean the books are waiting?" "Exactly. They're dynamic, changing with time and choice. If the books rewrite past events, these blank pages might be the space where the future can still be shaped." The idea sent a thrill through them both, but beneath that, a cold thread of fear tightened in Alara's stomach. If the future was unwritten, then her own faith, the death the cipher had predicted, might still be avoided or rewritten. But how? Their whispered conversation was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Professor Alden Grey, who emerged from the shadows like a spectre. His silver hair caught the light, and his piercing blue eyes fixed on the open tome. "Treading into forbidden waters, Alara," he said quietly, voice grave. "The unwritten pages are not merely gaps. They are the library's deepest secret. To meddle with them is to challenge the flow of time itself." Alara met his gaze steadily. "If the future can be changed, isn't it worth the risk?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps, but be warned, the deeper you go, the more you risk losing yourself to the shifting narratives. The library does not forgive easily." As Gray's footsteps faded into the recesses of the library, Alara closed the tome with a decisive thud. Her heart pounded with a mixture of hope and fear. The story was not yet complete, and now, more than ever, she was determined to be the one to write the ending. Outside, The ancient walls seemed to pulse with quiet anticipation, the line between past, present, and future blurring in the dim light. Somewhere in the depths of the library, the ivory masks of the cult watched silently, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Alara's fingers traced the blank page one last time before she slipped the book carefully into her bag. The unwritten pages beckoned, and she was ready to face whatever story awaited her pen. The library's secrets were vast, but so was her resolve. The narrative was hers, to shape or shatter. With a final glance at the flickering lamps, Alara stepped into the shadows, the promise of the unwritten future weighing heavily in her mind. She had discovered the void, but could she fill it in time? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the library whispered its ancient, shifting tale. Alara Whitlock sat hunched at a narrow wooden table, her round glasses catching the fading light from a solitary desk lamp. Around her, the shelves loomed like ancient sentinels, their tomes whispering faintly as if alive with the stories they contained and concealed. The scent of old parchment, ink, and the faint musk of mildew clung to the air, mingling with Elaro's quickened breath as she pored over a tangle of handwritten notes and scanned documents. Each page seemed to pulse with hidden meaning, a cipher within a cipher, waiting for her to unravel its threads. Her fingers trembled slightly as she cross-referenced the marginalia in a crumbling manuscript. With the digital archives Mina had helped her access, the faint glow of the screen illuminated her intense eyes, shadowed beneath the frames of her glasses. She had uncovered names that appeared innocuous at first glance, but took on a sinister weight when linked to the cryptic symbols and subtle alterations in the rewriting books. Faculty members she had once admired, students she had passed in the hallways, even the elusive librarian, Marlawall, bore the marks of the Ivory cult's infiltration. A sudden noise startled her. Faint shuffle echoed from the corridor outside the restricted section. Alara froze, heart hammering, every nerve alert. The library, usually a sanctuary of silence, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows and whispered threats. Gathering her notes, she slipped the papers into her satchel and moved swiftly but quietly through the narrow aisles, her footsteps muffled by thick rugs. The library's vastness stretched endlessly. A maze she had come to know intimately yet now seemed to shift unpredictably around her. Later that evening, in the cavernous main hall, Alara met with Professor Alden Gray beneath the towering arches and stained glass windows that cast fractured patterns of fading light upon the marble floor. His gaunt figure, framed by silver hair and piercing blue eyes, was a stark contrast against the gloom. Their conversation was cautious, laden with unspoken meanings and careful probing. "You tread a perilous path, Alara," Gray murmured, his voice low and grave. "The roots of this cult run deeper than you imagine, entwining with those sworn to guard knowledge. Trust is a scarce commodity here." Ilara's gaze hardened. "I have to know who is behind this. If the rewriting books are controlled by them, then every story, every truth is at their mercy." Gray's eyes flickered with a shadow of regret. "Beware that your search does not consume you. The line between enemy and ally blurs in these halls." After the meeting, Alara found solace in the company of Mina Solis, whose spirited loyalty and sharp mind offered a counterbalance to the growing suspicion that gnawed at her. In a quiet corner of the library, the flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across their faces as Mina shared the latest breakthroughs from the digital archives. "Look here," Mina whispered, pointing to a series of encrypted emails and surveillance logs. "These aren't just random students. They're organized, communicating in code. The cult's reach is far beyond what we feared." Alara's pulse quickened. "We need to expose them before it's too late." But who can we trust? Mina's eyes glinted with determination. We trust each other, for now. Yet, as the days passed, the invisible web of deceit tightened like a noose. Ilara felt eyes on her constantly, whispers trailing her footsteps, and once familiar faces now seemed masks, hiding darker intentions. The library's labyrinthine corridors, once a source of wonder, transformed into a gauntlet of suspicion and dread. One night, Ilara walked alone beneath the towering shelves, the distant creaks of shifting wood and rustling pages echoing like ghostly footsteps. The shadows seemed to twist and lengthen, the weight of isolation pressing down. Her thoughts spiraled. Could she break free from the cult's grasp, or was she destined to become another thread woven into their relentless tapestry? The chapter closed on Ilara's resolute vow, whispered to the silent stacks, "I will uncover the truth, no matter the cost." And as the library held its breath, the shifting narratives awaited the next move in a game where trust was the most fragile and dangerous currency. The predicted crime had come to pass, and the victim was someone she had known, a figure quietly woven into her life's fragile tapestry. The rain outside the library's stained glass windows drummed a sorrowful rhythm against the ancient stone, as if the very building mourned with her. She clutched the cold receiver, her breath shallow, eyes wide with disbelief and pain. The loss was not just a statistic in the cipher's unfolding narrative. It was a wrenching blow that shattered the thin veneer of control she had been clinging to. Her heart pounded with a tumult of emotions, grief, rage, helplessness. Sensed somewhere beneath it all, a fierce determination ignited. She would not be another casualty of this cryptic fate. Later that evening, the library seemed to close in around her. The shadows lengthened as she wandered through the stacks, the scent of old paper and dust thick in the air. Mina found her there, sitting cross-legged on the floor amid scattered volumes, her notes abandoned. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the unspoken weight between them was palpable. Ilara's voice cracked as she spoke, her frustration spilling over in sharp words that startled even herself. "You don't understand, Mina. Nothing we do matters if the cycle is unbreakable." Mina's loyal gaze never wavered, but the tension between them was undeniable. The friendship that had been a balm now felt fragile, strained by the relentless pressure of their quest. Seeking guidance, Ilara approached Professor Alden Gray the next day. His gaunt figure was silhouetted against the cluttered shelves of his office, the faint scent of tobacco and old leather mingling with the quiet hum of the university. His eyes, piercing and unreadable, softened briefly as he regarded her. "The pursuit of forbidden knowledge exacts a cost," he murmured, his voice low but carrying weight. "You are at a precipice, Ilara. The question is whether you will fall or find footing on the other side." The cryptic warning resonated deeply, mingling with Ilara's own fears and hopes. Meanwhile, Jasper Lang's challenge was relentless. In the crowded lecture hall, his voice cut through the murmurs like a knife as he publicly questioned the validity of her theories. Ilara felt the eyes of her peers, some skeptical, others curious, fixated on her. Her heart pounded, but she met Jasper's gaze steadily, refusing to falter. "You're chasing shadows, Whitlock," he sneered. "These books rewrite themselves, sure, but that doesn't mean they hold truths about the future." "Perhaps," Ilara replied quietly, "but shadows can reveal more than light sometimes." The clash underscored the growing divide between doubt and belief, a tension that threatened to unravel her fragile alliances. That night, alone in her cramped apartment, Ilara pored over her notes, the cipher symbols blurring as exhaustion tugged at her eyelids. The personal loss she had suffered was a cruel reminder of the stakes involved, but also a source of unyielding resolve. She had crossed the breaking point. There was no turning back. Her fingers trembled as she traced the cryptic lines, whispering to the silent room, "I will rewrite this story, no matter the cost." Outside, the rain softened to a gentle drizzle, as if granting a fleeting moment of peace before the storm to come. Ilara Whitlock's fingers trembled as she traced the cryptic symbols etched into the margins of the ancient manuscript. Her pulse quickened, not just from the revelation the cipher had whispered to her, but from the realization that the foundation of her fragile trust was crumbling. It had been Mina who first noticed the inconsistencies, subtle shifts in conversations, the misplaced notes in their shared research, the inexplicable absences. Mina had hissed in the quiet of the stacks, her voice barely more than a breath. "Someone's been watching us closer than we thought." Ilara's mind raced back to the moments she had dismissed as paranoia, the too quick answers, the nervous glances, the way her ally had steered her attention away from certain texts, each memory now cast in a sinister light. She waited, heart pounding, as the footsteps approached, deliberate, measured. The figure emerged from the shadows, eyes flickering with a mixture of regret and resolve. "You shouldn't have seen that," the voice murmured, cold and unfamiliar. The confrontation was swift and suffocating. Words spilled over each other in a torrent of accusation and justification. The betrayal was not merely personal. It was a calculated move by the Ivory cult to dismantle the resistance from within. As the figure melted back into the labyrinthine corridors, Ilara was left clutching the fragment of torn trust. Mina's presence was a bomb, her fierce loyalty a reminder that not all shadows concealed enemies. That evening, under the watchful gaze of Professor Alden Gray, Ilara's resolve hardened. His cryptic warning, "Trust is a fragile artifact," easily shattered but painstakingly rebuilt code in her ears. The mentor's own history with the cult lent weight to his words, a cautionary tale etched in his gaunt features. Back in the solitude of her dorm room, surrounded by the flickering glow of candlelight, Ilara studied the cipher anew. The texts seemed to ripple and change beneath her gaze, the library's rewriting magic now a cruel mirror of her fractured reality. Every line, every symbol, was a challenger call to outwit the unseen puppeteers. The veil of lies had been lifted, revealing a deeper, more insidious conspiracy. Yet, within the shadows of deception, Ilara found a sparker, renewed determination to expose the cult and reclaim the narrative of her own life. The path ahead was perilous and uncertain, but surrender was not an option. With a steadying breath, she reached for her notebook, pen poised to write the next chapter, not one dictated by fate, but forged by her own hand. The game had changed, and Ilara would be ready. Outside, the library's ancient walls seemed to hold their breath, the very air humming with the tension of unspoken secrets. Somewhere beyond the stacks, the ivory-masks waited in silence, their cold eyes watching, waiting for the story to unfold. But Ilara was no longer just a character in their tale. She was a challenger, a breaker of cycles, a bearer of hope cloaked in dread. And the final page was still unwritten. Ilara Whitlock hunched over the ancient tome, her round glasses catching flickers of candlelight as her eyes darted across the pages. The ink seemed to dance, shifting subtly beneath her gaze, a maddening, hypnotic movement that both terrified and fascinated her. Each line of the cipher, once cryptic and impenetrable, now revealed new layers of meaning as she pieced together fragments she had overlooked before. Her breath came in shallow bursts, mingling with the musty scent of aged parchment and leather bindings. Outside, the wind whispered against the cracked stained glass windows, a mournful chorus that seemed to echo the urgency thudding in her chest. She traced the delicate, looping symbols with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down through the text. The cipher was no longer just a prediction of crimes to commit, was a roadmap, a fragile thread woven through time that might lead her away from the fatal end she feared. A sudden creak drew her attention to the library's entrance, where Mina Solis appeared, her auburn curls illuminated by the faint glow of her laptop screen. "Ilara," Mina whispered, eyes bright with anticipation. "I think I've found something in the digital archives that might help us decode the final layer. It's like the cipher has a second language, one that only reveals itself when combined with modern code." Ilara's heart surged with cautious hope as Mina settled beside her, fingers flying over the keyboard with practiced ease. The ancient symbols began to merge with digital fragments, a symphony of old and new knowledge unfolding before them. The air grew thick with concentration and the unspoken fear that time was slipping away. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the quiet footsteps of Professor Alden Gray. His tall, gaunt figure emerged from the shadows, silver hair catching the lamplight, and piercing blue eyes fixed intently on Ilara. "You tread dangerous ground, Ilara," he murmured, voice low and grave. "The cipher is not merely a prophecy. It is a trap set by those who believe fate is immutable. To attempt to rewrite it is to challenge forces that may consume you entirely." Ilara met his gaze, the mixture of warning and sorrow therein only deepening her resolve. "I have no choice," she replied softly but firmly. "If the final crime is truly my death, then I must find a way to change it, even if the cost is great." Professor Gray's eyes flickered with a shadow of old regrets. "Then you must be prepared to pay the price." Returning her focus to the tome, Ilara's eyes caught a subtle variation in the cipher's pattern, a series of blank spaces that pulsed faintly, as if alive. Her pulse quickened. This was the secret she had sensed, the unwritten passage hinted at in previous chapters of the code. Slowly, she began to transcribe the hidden message, each symbol resonating with an eerie clarity. The message described a ritual not of magic, but of narrative, manipulation and act that could alter the course of the final crime. It required a precise sequence of actions within the library's heart, a confrontation with the Ivory cult's influence at its source. But the text was clear. Such an attempt risked unraveling the very fabric of reality as the books rewrote themselves, with unknown consequences. Mina leaned closer, voice trembling with excitement and fear. "This could be our chance, Ilara, to break the cycle." Ilara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Or it could be our doom." The weight of the choice settled upon her like the thick dust motes swirling in the library's stale air. Yet beneath the dread lay a fragile, flickering hope, a possibility that the story was not yet finished, that she could still write her own ending. As the clock ticked inexorably forward, Ilara gathered her courage and prepared to face the darkest chapter of her journey. The cipher's secret was no longer a mere puzzle. It was a call to arms, a desperate gamble against destiny itself. The library seemed to hold its breath, the shifting pages momentarily still, as Ilara whispered to herself, "This is not the end." And with that, the final act began. Inside, Ilara Whitlock sat across from Mina Solis, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of a single lamp hanging low over a wooden table scarred with the rings of countless cups. Around them, a handful of figures leaned in close, their eyes darting nervously as they exchanged hushed words. These were the defectors, former members of the Ivory cult, or its skeptics, who had turned their backs on the secret society's shadowy creed. Ilara's heart pounded as she listened to their stories. Each whispered revelation wove a tapestry of doubt and defiance. They controlled the narrative of history, one woman murmured, her fingers trembling as she clutched a fragile leather notebook. But when I saw the lives they were destroying, I couldn't stay silent anymore. Mina reached out, her hand steady on the woman's arm, offering an unspoken promise of safety and solidarity. "We're here to change the story," Mina said softly. Together, the meeting was fraught with tension. Every glance over a shoulder, every pause was a reminder of the dangers they faced. Yet the atmosphere crackled with a fragile hope. Here, in the dim light of the cafe's secluded back room, a resistance was born. Days later, Alara returned to the library with a newfound purpose. The old building greeted her with the familiar scent of aged parchment and dust, the air heavy with secrets waiting to be uncovered. In the restricted archives, she spread out the documents handed to her by a defector, ancient manuscripts, coded letters, and cryptic marginalia that spoke of the cult's manipulations across centuries. The flickering fluorescent lights above cast long shadows as Ilara's eyes scanned the fragile pages. Each symbol and phrase was a thread she could pull, unraveling the fabric of the Ivory cult's control. The deeper she delved, the more urgent her mission became. Every discovery was a step closer to understanding the machinery behind the rewriting of history itself. Meanwhile, Mina prowled the labyrinthine corridors of the library, her keen senses alert to every sound and movement. One evening, as she rounded a corner near the restricted stacks, a shadow detached itself from the darkness. An unknown figure whispered a warning, a fleeting glimpse of alliance or a trap. Ilara couldn't yet say. The cold stone walls seemed to close in, the echo of footsteps amplifying the sudden surge of paranoia. But Mina's resolve only hardened. "We don't have the luxury of fear," she whispered into the empty corridor. "Not now." Back in the cramped office that served as their war room, Alara gathered her new allies. The space was cluttered with stacks of books, yellowed manuscripts, and stray notes scrawled in haste. A single desk lamp cast a pool of light over the determined faces around the table. They spoke in low tones, weaving plans and contingencies, each voice carrying the weight of desperation and hope. Professor Alden Gray joined them briefly, his piercing blue eyes reflecting the flicker of the lamp. "The cult's grip extends further than you realize," he warned, "but their certainty is their weakness. You must exploit the cracks in their narrative." Ilara nodded, feeling the immense burden of the path ahead. "We'll need to be smarter, faster united." The alliance was fragile, built on mutual suspicion and the shared desire to break free from the Ivory cult's deterministic hold. Yet in that small, cluttered room, they found strength in numbers, a flicker of light in the encroaching darkness. As the night deepened, Alara couldn't shake a growing question from her mind. Could they truly trust one another? The cult had sown seeds of doubt and betrayal for centuries. Their greatest enemy might not just be the Ivory cult itself, but the fractures it had planted within those who dared to resist. But for now, there was work to be done. The cipher awaited, the next pages yet to be deciphered, and the final crime still looming on the horizon. Alara pushed her doubts aside, focusing on the mission that had become her life. "We write our own story," she whispered to Mina as they closed the door behind them, stepping back into the shifting shadows of the library. "And this time, we decide how it ends." Alara Whitlock moved cautiously between the towering stacks, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and dust, but beneath it, something indefinable, an undercurrent of uncertainty permeated the space. The books seemed to breathe, their pages fluttering in a breeze she could not feel, whispering secrets that twisted and turned just beyond comprehension. Beside her, Mina Solis's footsteps echoed softly. The usual spark in Mina's eyes was tempered with worry. "Do you feel it too?" Mina whispered, her voice barely above the rustling pages. Elara nodded, adjusting her round glasses. "It's like the library itself is watching us, changing with every step we take. The cipher, it's getting harder to read. The words shift before I can grasp their meaning." They paused at a junction where the shelves curved unnaturally, the titles on the spines warping and rearranging themselves, histories becoming myths, facts folding into fables. Ilara's breath hitched as the realization dawned. Anew the rewriting was accelerating, the boundary between the past and present thinning like fragile parchment. "We don't have much time," Ilara said, voice tight. "The final crime, the one the cipher predicts, it's coming soon." Mina clenched her jaw. "We need Professor Gray's insight. He might hold the key to understanding what the cult plans next." The professor awaited them in a shadowed alcove near the library's eastern wing, his silver hair catching the dim light like a halo. His piercing blue eyes regarded them with a mix of caution and urgency. "You tread a dangerous path," he began, voice low but resonant. "The Ivory cult's grip tightens. They manipulate not just history, but the very fabric of reality here. The rewriting books are their instruments, and soon they will attempt to seal their design." He paused, searching their faces. "But there is a fracture in their plan, an opening if you dare to exploit it." Ilara leaned forward, heart pounding. "What must I do?" Professor Gray's gaze sharpened. "Decode the final layers of the cipher. But beware, the closer you get, the more the library will resist. You'll face threats not just from the cult, but from the very walls around you." As he spoke, the faint hum of shifting pages grew louder, a chorus of mutating stories echoing through the stacks. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. Darkness swallowed the library whole. Ilara's pulse quickened. "Mina," a soft gasp answered her. Around them, shadows coalesced, and distant footsteps echoed, a reminder that unseen eyes watched their every move. The library was alive, unpredictable, and hostile. With trembling hands, Ilara struck a match. The tiny flame wavered before steadying. The flickering candle cast long shadows that danced along the walls, which now seemed to ripple like water. The books around them shimmered, their titles blurring, their pages flowing like ink in a stream. At a secluded reading table, Ilara spread fragments of the ancient cipher before her. Each symbol and line was a thread in the tapestry of fate she sought to unravel. Her fingers traced the letters, desperate to extract meaning from the chaos. "We can't let them win," she whispered, more to herself than to Mina. "If the final crime is my death, then I have to rewrite the narrative, change the ending." Mina reached out, gripping Ilara's hand firmly. "We'll do it together, no matter what comes." But even as they clung to hope, a shiver of doubt settled in Ilara's mind. The library's walls seemed to pulse with a living heartbeat, and the shadows whispered warnings she could not ignore. The storm was gathering, and soon she would stand at its very eye. Outside, the night deepened, but inside, the battle for fate had already begun. The air was cooler here, thick with the scent of aged parchment and a faint trace of dust that whispered of forgotten histories. Her fingers trailed along the spines of the books, some of which seemed to pulse faintly beneath her touch, as if alive with secrets yet to be unearthed. She had returned to the restricted section, driven by a restless urgency to uncover whatever truths lay beyond the surface of the cryptic cipher. Her footsteps echoed softly against the stone floor. the only sound amid the towering shelves that stretched like ancient sentinels toward the high, vaulted ceiling. As she rounded a corner near the back of the library, her breath caught. There, half concealed behind an overgrown tapestry and a leaning row of neglected tomes, was a section of the wall that looked oddly out of place. The stone was smoother here, the seams less visible, as if it had been crafted to conceal rather than support. Alara's heart quickened. She recalled the hints Professor Gray had dropped in his last cryptic lecture whispers of a secret chamber hidden within the library's deepest recesses, a place that housed the very mechanism by which the rewriting of history was controlled. She knelt, brushing away years of dust and cobwebs from a stone slab that, to the casual eye, seemed merely part of the wall. Her fingers traced a faint pattern carved into it, a delicate swirl of symbols that matched those she had seen in the cipher. With a tentative push, the slab gave way, shifting silently. A soft, mechanical grinding sound filled the air as the wall slid open, revealing a narrow passage dimly illuminated by flickering sconces. Alara hesitated only for a moment before stepping inside, the cool air wrapping around her like a cloak. The passage led to a hidden chamber, a sanctum filled with an array of curious instruments and artifacts. Gears of brass and iron, ancient levers etched with arcane runes, and delicate glass tubes filled with swirling mists stood arranged on tables and shelves. Her breath hitched as she took in the sight. This was the heart of the library's secret, the source of its uncanny power to rewrite the narratives contained within its walls. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal fashioned from ivory and dark wood, upon which rested an amulet carved with shifting symbols that seemed almost alive. The air thrummed with a quiet energy, as though the chamber itself was aware of her presence. Suddenly, a shadow moved near the entrance. Alara turned to see Professor Alden Gray step into the chamber, his tall, gaunt form silhouetted against the flickering light. His piercing blue eyes regarded her with a mixture of concern and something deeper, perhaps regret. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, his voice low and grave. "This place is not meant for the curious. Its mechanisms are ancient and dangerous. To tamper with them is to invite chaos." Alara met his gaze steadily, the weight of her discovery pressing upon her. "I have to understand," she replied, voice firm despite the tremor within. "If these machines control the rewriting of the books, then they hold the key to the cipher and to stopping the final crime they predict." Professor Gray sighed, stepping closer to the amulet. "The Ivory cult has guarded this chamber for centuries, using these devices to manipulate the flow of history itself. Their obsession with predestination has blinded them to the cost." As he spoke, the heavy oak door at the chamber's entrance creaked open once more. Librarian Marlowe appeared, his dark cloak swirling around him like a shadow made flesh. His eyes, sharp and unreadable beneath his hood, flicked between Alara and Professor Gray. He said nothing, but the weight of his silent scrutiny sent a shiver down Alara's spine. "Marlowe," Gray acknowledged him with a nod. "You should not interfere." The librarian merely inclined his head, a faint, enigmatic smile brushing his lips. Then, as silently as he had come, he vanished back into the shadows from which he had emerged. Left in the charged silence of the chamber, Alara stepped forward to the pedestal once more. She reached out, her fingers closing around the ivory amulet. The symbols beneath her touch shifted and pulsed, the faint hum of the chamber growing louder, resonating deep within her chest. Suddenly, the room seemed to tilt, the walls breathing and warping as if the very fabric of reality was fluid here. Alara's mind swelled with possibilities and dangers. Could she, by manipulating these mechanisms, rewrite her own narrative? Could she break free from the fatalistic cycle the cipher had forewarned? Her fingers tightened on the amulet, determination igniting within her. The battle for control over the written fate was no longer confined to cryptic codes and shadowed whispers. It was here, in this secret chamber, where history itself could be bent or broken. Outside, the library's ancient halls seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the next page to be turned. Elara's pulse quickened as she studied the intricate network of gears and dials. She traced the arcane symbols engraved on the brass plates, recognizing some from the cipher, spirals that denoted time's cyclical nature, angular runes representing fate's binding chains. Each mechanism appeared calibrated to subtly alter the contents of the books, shifting narratives like threads in a loom. "How does it work?" she whispered, more to herself than to Gray. "The cult devised this apparatus centuries ago," Gray explained, moving to a nearby console. "It channels the collective memory of the library, imprinting new events onto the manuscripts. By activating certain sequences, they can rewrite histories, erase unwanted truths, and inscribe the future with their chosen designs." Ilara felt the weight of his words settle heavily. This was no mere metaphorical rewriting. The book's shifting stories were direct consequences of this mechanical marvel, a tangible expression of the cult's obsession with predetermination. "And what about the gaps? The unwritten pages I've seen?" she asked. Gray's eyes darkened. "Those are the blank slates, the future yet to be inscribed. The cult fears these spaces because they represent uncertainty, chaos beyond their control." The room hummed softly as Ilara turned her attention back to the amulet. She held it up to the dim light, watching the symbols shift like living things across its surface. A sudden impulse urged her to experiment. Carefully, she aligned the amulet with a corresponding indentation on the pedestal. The chamber vibrated, the gears clicking into motion with a slow, deliberate rhythm. A panel on the far wall slid open, revealing a hidden alcove filled with ancient manuscripts and scrolls. Among them, Ilara spotted a ledger bound in cracked leather, its cover embossed with the same ivory mask symbol she had seen in the cult's gatherings. "This must be a record of their manipulations," she said breathlessly, reaching for it. Before she could open it, Gray's hand rested lightly on her shoulder. "Be cautious. The cult's knowledge is powerful but dangerous. Every alteration here echoes beyond these walls." Ilara nodded but felt a spark of rebellion. The cipher had predicted her death, yet here lay the tools to challenge that fate. She opened the ledger, scanning the faded inks that recorded changes made through the ages. Eras rewritten, figures erased or exalted, events rearranged to serve the cult's vision. As she read, a cold realization took hold. Her parents' disappearance was likely another thread woven into this grand design. Suddenly, a distant clang echoed through the library. The hidden chamber seemed to grow colder, shadows lengthening as if the space itself was warning her to stop. "We are not alone," Gray murmured, eyes narrowing toward the door. Ilara's heart pounded. The Ivory cult's agents were closing in, their grip tightening. But armed with this newfound understanding, she felt a fragile hope. Perhaps the cycle could be broken. With one last glance at the ancient mechanisms, she pocketed the amulet and closed the ledger. The path ahead was perilous, but knowledge was her weapon, and the hidden chamber her battleground. As she stepped back through the secret passage, the door slid shut behind her with a final, resolute thud. The library resumed its quiet vigil, but the story was far from over. Outside, the first stars pierced the night sky, silent witnesses to a fate still unwritten. Shadows stretched long across the ancient stone walls, their edges blurred by the flickering candlelight that sputtered intermittently, as if hesitant to illuminate secrets best left untouched. Ilara's breath was shallow, her pulse a steady drum of apprehension as she awaited Mina's arrival. Minutes stretched like hours until the soft footsteps approached, hesitant yet deliberate. Mina entered, her usually bright eyes dulled by fatigue and something darker, unspoken tension that clung to her like a second skin. Ilara motioned her closer, voice low but urgent. "We need to talk about what I found in the cipher's latest section." Mina's lips pressed into a thin line. "I know, but there's something else, Ilara. Something you need to hear." The words hung between them, heavy and foreboding. Ilara's heart tightened. Trust was a fragile currency in these days, and every secret threatened to devalue it. The confrontation unfolded quietly, but with a volcanic intensity. Mina admitted to having withheld information details about a clandestine meeting she had attended, where whispers of the Ivory cult's next moves were exchanged. Her decision to keep it secret stemmed from fear and a desperate wish to protect Ilara from further harm. Yet, the betrayal, intentional or not, stung sharply. "Why didn't you tell me? We're supposed to be in this together." Ilara's voice cracked like breaking ice. Mina's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I thought I was shielding you. I was wrong." Words like shards of glass, their friendship fractured in that dim corner. The library, once a sanctuary, now felt like a labyrinth of distrust. Later, Professor Alden Gray's presence added another layer of unease. His tall, gaunt figure appeared at the edge of the study room, eyes sharp and unreadable. He spoke in riddles, warning of unseen forces tightening their grip, and the price of divided alliances. "The path you tread is perilous, Ilara. Not all who walk beside you carry the light," he intoned, his voice barely above a whisper. The group's fragile cohesion unraveled further under the strain of suspicion. Heated debates erupted, accusations flung like daggers across scattered manuscripts and cryptic notes. Each member questioned the other's motives, alliances blurred, and the looming threat of the Ivory cult seemed to grow more insurmountable. Outside, the world was unforgivingly cold. Ilara stood beneath the street lamp's pale glow, the wind tugging at her coat as if urging her to flee or fight. Isolation wrapped around her like a shroud, yet amidst the loneliness, a fierce resolve kindled within her. She was no longer merely a student chasing shadows in an ancient library. She was a defender of stories, a challenger of fate. The fractures in trust were painful, but they had forged her sharper, more cautious, and more determined than ever. As she looked back toward the looming silhouette of the library, its windows glowing faintly, Ilara knew the battle was far from over. The final confrontation with the Ivory cult was drawing near, and only by navigating the treacherous maze of alliances and betrayals could she hope to rewrite the narrative of her own destiny. The night whispered secrets as the city slept, but Ilara's mind raced with questions. Who could she trust, and how much of the story was still hers to tell? And so, with the weight of fractured bonds pressing on her shoulders, Ilara stepped forward into the unknown. The fragile hope of redemption flickering like the candlelight in the dark corridors she called home. Shadows danced across the cracked walls, lined with tomes whose spines bore the scars of centuries. Ilara Whitlock sat opposite Professor Alden Gray, her eyes keen and searching beneath the weight of her round glasses. The air smelled of dust and forgotten knowledge, a tangible silence pressing upon them both as the professor produced a delicate manuscript from his coat. "This," Gray began, his voice low and measured, is the heart of the Ivory cult's philosophy. He carefully unfolded the brittle pages, revealing intricate calligraphy intertwined with cryptic symbols, ivory masks, Ouroboros serpents, and winding scripts that seemed to writhe like living things. They believe history is not a stream of chance, but a tapestry woven with deliberate threads, where every event is preordained and recorded in the rewriting books of the library. Alara leaned forward, her fingers itching to touch the fragile parchment, but restrained by reverence and caution. So the books, they're not just recording history, they're controlling it. Gray nodded slowly. Precisely. To the cult, narrative is power. If you can control the story, you can control reality itself. A faint creak echoed from the far corner of the room, but both remained still, their focus absolute. Ilara's mind raced as she absorbed the implications. The Ivory cult's creed was not merely academic obsession. It was fanaticism, the belief that fate was written and immutable, that free will was a dangerous illusion. But if fate is fixed, Ilara whispered, then what hope do I have to change my ending? Gray's eyes glinted with a mixture of sorrow and defiance. That is the question, isn't it? The cult believes in inevitability, but there are cracks even in the most meticulously written script. Their discourse carried them deeper into the night, touching on the cult's origins. Founded long ago by scholars who feared chaos and sought order through control, the Ivory cult had evolved into guardians of predestination, zealots convinced that history's course must not be altered. They wore ivory masks as symbols of their devotion, blank faces, hiding countless secrets. Ilara's thoughts drifted to the mural she had glimpsed earlier in a hidden alcove. The ivory-masked figures entwined with serpents and books. The image now seemed a portent, an emblem of their stranglehold over time and narrative. She shivered despite the warmth of the room. Gray's voice broke through her reverie. They see themselves as custodians, but their creed is a prison. They trap themselves and others in a cycle of repetition, every event a verse in a song that cannot change. Ilara's hands clenched into fists. Then I have to break that cycle. For all of us. Gray's gaze was grave. Be careful, Ilara. Challenging the cult is not just intellectual rebellion. It is dangerous, and the library itself may turn against you. A sudden gust rattled the window, scattering loose papers like fleeting memories. Outside, the twilight deepened into night, and Ilara felt the weight of the cult's creed settle over her like a mantle. Yet beneath the dread, a spark of defiance ignited. If the story could be controlled, then perhaps it could also be rewritten. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but Ilara's resolve hardened. The Ivory cult's belief in fate was their greatest weapon and their potential undoing. As the oil lamp guttered low, she vowed to unravel their creed and forge a new narrative, one where her fate was not sealed, but shaped by her own hand. The library's walls seemed to close in around her, whispering ancient secrets and warnings. But Ilara Whitlock, with all her doubts and fears, was ready to listen and to fight. The story was far from over, and somewhere in the shadowed stacks, the ivory masks watched silently, waiting. The faint scent of aged paper and dust hung thick in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of cold stone. Gray sat hunched over his desk, his gaunt frame outlined by the pale moonlight streaming through the stained glass window. His silver hair caught the glow, a stark contrast to the shadows gathering beneath his deep-set eyes. Ilara's footsteps were hesitant but resolute. She had pressed him harder than ever before, and now the weight of her questions seemed to press upon the room. Gray did not look up immediately. Instead, His fingers traced the faded ink of an ancient manuscript, as if seeking comfort in its familiar lines. The silence stretched, taut and uneasy, until his voice finally broke the quiet. "You want to know what I was," he said softly, his tone heavy with years of regret. "What I did when the cult's grip first tightened around this university." Ilara nodded, her heart pounding. She had suspected fragments of his past involvement, but hearing it confirmed cast a shadow over the mentor she had come to rely on. The story unfolded in a series of vivid flashbacks, each one carved sharply against the backdrop of the present. She saw a younger, grey, vibrant and idealistic, drawn into the Ivory cult's secret gatherings. The vaulted chamber where the cult convened was bathed in flickering torchlight, ivory masks gleaming eerily as silent figures chanted cryptic verses. Grey's expression was conflicted, his youthful face torn between fascination and unease. He had been seduced not by blind fanaticism, but by a desire to understand the power the cult wielded control over the narratives that shaped history itself. Yet, doubt gnawed at him from within. Not all was as it seemed. The texts they protected, the rewriting books, were as much a prison as a weapon. Back in the present, Ilara's voice trembled as she asked, "Why did you stay? Why not walk away?" Grey's piercing blue eyes met hers, revealing a flicker of vulnerability rarely seen. "Because," he said, "if I left, who would stand against them from within?" The revelation complicated everything. Grey was no mere mentor. He was a man caught in the shadows cast long ago, struggling to atone while trapped inside the cult's web. Later, as Ilara wandered the shifting labyrinth of bookshelves, the weight of history pressed down on her. The air buzzed softly with whispered secrets, the library alive with the restless murmurs of stories rewritten and futures rewritten anew. Doubt and determination warred within her chest. Could she trust Grey, whose past was intertwined with the very forces she sought to destroy? The question lingered, as elusive as the rewritten texts themselves. Yet, amid the uncertainty, a fragile hope stirred that knowledge, even when shadowed by betrayal, could still be a weapon to shape destiny. As the moon dipped lower, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts among the tomes, Ilara steeled herself. The battle for the narrative was far from over, and the lines between friend and foe blurred like ink bleeding through fragile parchment, but she would not falter. The story was hers to write, even if the final chapter remained unwritten. And somewhere deep within the library's heart, the ivory masks watched silently, their secrets waiting to be unearthed. The heavy silence of the library's restricted archives pressed in around her, punctuated only by the occasional flicker of candlelight that cast dancing shadows upon the ancient walls. Each word she deciphered from the final pages of the cipher felt like a cold hand tightening around her heart. The prophecy was clear, her death was not a distant possibility but an imminent certainty scripted with terrifying precision. She leaned back in the creaking wooden chair, her breath shallow, mind racing. The cipher's language was intricate, a labyrinth of symbols and coded warnings that finally converged on one chilling truth. The fatal crime predicted was her own murder, an event set to unfold within the very walls she now inhabited. The realization sent a shiver coursing down her spine, yet beneath the dread was a spark of fierce determination. If fate was penned by these rewriting books, then perhaps it could be rewritten. A sudden, soft voice broke the oppressive silence. "You should not linger here so long, Ilara. The deeper you delve, the darker the shadows become." Startled, Ilara turned to find Professor Alden Grey standing nearby, his gaunt frame silhouetted in the dim light. His silver hair shimmered like a halo, but his piercing blue eyes held a warning sharper than any blade. "The cipher you hold is more than a text," he continued, his tone low and gravelly. "It is a chain binding you to a destiny you might not escape without great cost." Ilara met his gaze steadily, the years of guarded wisdom in his eyes only fueling her resolve. "Then I will pay any cost. I refuse to be a passive character in this story. I will rewrite the ending." Professor Gray's expression softened briefly, a flicker of hope mingling with caution. "Very well. But be warned, those who seek to change their fate often awaken forces far beyond their control." Before Ilara could respond, the door burst open, and Mina Solis entered, breathless and wide-eyed. Clutched in her hands was a stack of encrypted notes she had uncovered in the digital archives. "Ilara, I think I found something, clues hidden beneath layers of code that the cult didn't expect anyone to crack. This could be the key to rewriting the final act." A surge of gratitude and renewed hope filled Ilara's chest. "Show me," she urged, motioning to the scattered papers on the table. As they pored over the notes, the oppressive atmosphere was briefly lifted by their shared determination. Yet the threat lurking in the shadows remained palpable. From the depths of the stacks emerged a figure cloaked in darkness, librarian Marlowe. His ivory mask caught the candlelight, gleaming ominously as he silently watched them, a living emblem of the ivory cult's pervasive vigilance. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. The cult's presence was a constant reminder that her quest was not only intellectual but a dangerous battle for survival. Every step she took to alter the narrative risked provoking their wrath. Drawing a deep breath, Ilara closed the ancient tome and met her friend's eyes. The cipher's final message is a warning and a challenge. It tells of conditions I must fulfill to survive the breaking of a cycle forged in shadows. We have little time, and the stakes have never been higher. Mina nodded fiercely. "Then we fight not just for you, but for everyone trapped in this twisted story." Professor Gray stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on Ilara's shoulder. "Together, then, but beware, the final pages may demand sacrifices none of us can foresee." Outside, the library seemed to hold its breath, the books on the shelves whispering secrets as if aware that the climax was near. Ilara felt the weight of history and destiny pressing down on her, but also the fragile hope that knowledge and courage might yet bend the course of fate. She opened the tome once more, ready to face the final cipher and the dark future it foretold. The last page awaited, its story unwritten, and Ilara was determined to be the author of her own survival. The candle flickered violently, shadows stretched and twisted, and the library's ancient heart beat faster. Time was running out. As she prepared to turn the page, a distant echo of footsteps whispered through the stacks, heralding the inevitable confrontation. The final act had begun, and Ilara stood at the precipice of destiny, poised between death and the hope of rewriting her fate. Ilara Whitlock stood rooted in the heart of the restricted wing, the air around her heavy with the scent of ancient leather and ink. Before her lay the manuscript she had long sought, the cryptic text that contained the key to unraveling the ivory cult's grip on the rewriting books. Her fingers trembled slightly as they brushed the brittle page, the faded symbols pulsing faintly beneath her touch as if alive. All around, the library seemed to breathe. The walls whispered, the shadows lengthened and retracted like restless spirits, and the very pages of the books trembled on their shelves. Ilara's breath caught. This was no ordinary library. It was a nexus of time and narrative, a place where stories danced on the edge of reality. "Are you ready?" Mina Solis's voice broke through the silence, steady and reassuring. She emerged from the shadows, carrying a small portable scanner and a laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating her determined face. We've calibrated the rewriting key. If this works, it could finally disrupt the cycle. Ilara nodded, swallowing the knot of fear tightening in her chest. We don't have a choice. If I don't act now, the final crime, the one that ends me, will come true. Mina moved quickly, setting up the equipment on a nearby table, cluttered with scrolls and tomes. Her fingers flew over the keys, pulling up coded scripts and aligning them with the cipher Ilara had painstakingly decoded. The low hum of the laptop filled the space, a modern pulse in the midst of ancient decay. Professor Alden Grey appeared silently at the entrance to the wing, his tall, gaunt frame casting an imposing shadow. His piercing blue eyes fixed on Ilara with a mixture of caution and something deep regret, perhaps. Tampering with the narrative is a dangerous game, he warned, his voice a gravelly whisper. The Ivory cult has bound the threads of fate tightly. One wrong move, and the entire fabric could unravel beyond repair. Ilara met his gaze steadily. I understand the risk, but I can't live as a pawn to their story. I have to try. Grey sighed, a flicker of something like hope passing through his eyes. Then you'll need more than courage. You'll need the strength to face what comes after. The librarian Marlowe appeared from the shadows, silent as a spectre. His sharp features were unreadable, his allegiance uncertain. He watched the ritual with a guarded expression, neither intervening nor offering aid. With a deep breath, Ilara placed the rewriting key against the ancient manuscript. The ink shimmered, the symbols shifting and rearranging before her eyes. The library seemed to pulse in response, the very air thickening as the spell of predestination began to crack. Words twisted and danced across the pages in a chaotic ballet, the boundaries of time and story blurring. Ilara felt herself caught in the storm, the dizzying rush of history rewriting itself around her. Visions flickered her own death, the cult's shadowy figures, the faces of friends and foes intertwining in an endless narrative loop. Mina reached out, steadying Ilara's trembling hands. Hold on, we're disrupting their control. The chaos intensified, the library groaning under the strain. Books rattled on shelves, pages flying open and closed with frantic urgency. Yet, amidst the turmoil, Ilara's resolve crystallized. This was her story to write. As the last symbols settled into a new pattern, a fragile silence fell. The rewriting ceased. The library held its breath, but the victory was tentative. The cycle was broken, yet the consequences rippled outward in unpredictable waves. The Ivory cult's hold had weakened, but shadows lingered. Ilara exchanged a glance with Mina and Grey, her heart pounding with exhausted hope. We've bought time, she whispered, but the story isn't finished yet. Ilara Whitlock stepped cautiously into the gloom, the faint glow of phosphorescent script illuminating her path. The air was thick with the scent of aged parchment and something indefinably arcane, a mingling of dust and power that made her skin prickle. Ivory masks hovered silently in the shadows, suspended as if by magic, their blank faces gleaming faintly in the pale light. Each mask bore a different expression, serene, wrathful, inscrutable. They were the cult's silent sentinels, the haunting symbols of the Ivory cult's dominion over the library's rewriting books. Ilara's heart hammered as she realized she had reached the very heart of the labyrinth. From the darkness, figures emerged, cloaked and masked, their movements deliberate and measured. The leader stepped forward, a tall figure whose ivory mask reflected the flickering light like a mirror. His voice was a cold whisper that seemed to ripple through the air, echoing against the stone walls. You tread dangerous ground, Ilara Whitlock. The story is not yours to change. Ilara squared her shoulders, clutching the ancient tome that contained the cipher. Stories belong to those who tell them, she replied quietly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within. And I refuse to be a footnote in your predetermined script. The chamber seemed to respond to her defiance. Words lifted from the pages of countless books swirled around them, inked letters twisting into shapes before dissolving into the air. The very fabric of the library trembled, as if reality itself was caught in the tension between fate and free will. Professor Alden Gray appeared beside her, his silver hair catching the spectral light. His eyes, sharp and piercing, met hers with a rare flicker of encouragement. "Remember, Ilara," he murmured, "the power of a story lies not only in its telling but in the belief it inspires." The cult's leader advanced, reciting passages from the rewriting books in a voice that wove spells as much as sentences. "The future is written, the cycle unbroken. Resistance is but a shadow in the grand design." But Ilara was no longer the uncertain student who stumbled upon a cryptic cipher. Her mind raced, connecting fragments of history, philosophy, and code. She countered with riddles and paradoxes, challenging the cult's dogma. Each exchange was a battle of intellect and will, their words shaping the shifting narrative that surrounded them. Suddenly, the tome in Ilara's hands seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The cipher's lines glowed, revealing a hidden message, a way to rewrite the final crime, to disrupt the deterministic cycle. With trembling fingers, she began to inscribe the new narrative, her heart pounding as the chamber shook violently. Books flung open, pages fluttering wildly as if caught in a storm of unseen winds. The ivory masks quivered on their invisible strings, their expressions flickering between rage and fear. The rewriting books fought back, but Ilara's defiant script carved a new path through the labyrinth of fate. As the chaos reached a crescendo, Ilara felt herself suspended between worlds. The boundary between past and future, reality and story dissolving. The chamber seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the outcome of this desperate gambit. When the storm finally settled, silence fell like a fragile veil. The ivory masks hung motionless, their power diminished but not destroyed. The books ceased their frenzied rewriting, the texts stabilizing into a new, uncertain order. Ilara gasped, the weight of what she had done settling over her. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Somewhere beyond the chamber's walls, the library awaited the next chapter, and her own story written, but still unfolding. "This is not the end," Professor Gray said quietly, standing beside her. "But perhaps, for the first time, it is a beginning shaped by choice." Ilara nodded, a fragile hope kindling in her chest. The battle of wits had changed the narrative, but the true journey to shape her own destiny had only just begun. With a determined breath, she stepped from the chamber, ready to face whatever the next page might hold. Ilara Whitlock stood at the center of it all, her breath shallow, eyes wide behind the round glasses that slid slightly down her nose as the pages of the books around her fluttered violently, glowing faintly with ethereal light. Words dissolved and reformed mid-air, sentences twisting into riddles she had never seen before. The very fabric of the library's existence was unraveling, and Ilara felt the crushing weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. "It's happening faster than I expected," Mina's voice crackled through the comlink strapped to Ilara's ear. "The digital archives are spinning out of control. I'm seeing corrupted texts, scrambled codes. It's like the whole system is fighting back. In the dim glow of the ancient lamps, Ilara's gaze darted toward the far wall where stacks of books swayed unnaturally, their spines bending like living creatures. She tightened her grip on the cipher-laden tome she had been rewriting, the ink still wet and shimmering faintly with an otherworldly sheen. Each alteration she made seemed to ripple through the library itself, an unpredictable cause and effect that frightened and fascinated her in equal measure. "We have to stop it," Ilara whispered to herself, voice barely audible over the low hum of the library's unnatural transformation. If this chaos continues, the library's reality could collapse entirely. A sudden crash echoed from the western wing, where a towering bookshelf buckled under the strain of the shifting narrative. Dust motes danced in the swirling light as a cascade of books tumbled toward the floor. Ilara pivoted sharply, heart pounding, only to see librarian Marlowe step forward with an unflinching calm. His ivory mask caught the faint glow, reflecting a pale, ghostly light as he reached out to steady the collapsing shelf with surprising strength. "Marlowe," Ilara called out, her voice sharp with urgency. "We don't have much time. The rewriting is spiraling out of control." He inclined his head slightly, the expression behind the mask unreadable. "The library resists change, Miss Whitlock, but it is not impervious." Before she could respond, a new wave of distorted pages erupted from the shelves, swirling around them like a storm of fragmented stories. Ilara felt the words brush against her skin, each syllable a whisper from 1,000 voices past and future. The library was alive, a living narrative that both embraced and resisted her interference. From the shadows, Professor Alden Gray emerged, his gaunt frame framed against the undulating walls that seemed to ripple like liquid ink. His piercing blue eyes locked onto Ilara's, a mixture of warning and reluctant admiration simmering beneath his calm exterior. "You tread a dangerous path," he said gravely. "To rewrite fate is to invite chaos. But perhaps chaos is the only way to break the cycle." Ilara swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling deep within her. "I have to try," she replied. "If I don't, the last crime the cipher predicted, my own death, will come true." Gray nodded slowly, stepping closer. "Then we must face the unraveling together." Mina's voice crackled again, this time with a note of triumph. "I've found a way to stabilize some of the digital archives, but it's a temporary fix. We need to disrupt the source, the rewriting mechanism itself." Ilara nodded, determination hardening her features. "The hidden chamber, the artifacts, that's where the cult's power lies. If we can sever their control there, maybe we can anchor the narrative before it slips entirely through our fingers." As they moved through the convulsing halls, the library seemed to resist at every turn. Walls shifted imperceptibly, staircases led to corridors that vanished when approached, and whispers of forgotten stories echoed just beyond comprehension. Ilara's mind raced to piece together the cipher's final message, to find the words that could rewrite not just a prophecy, but the very nature of the library's existence. At one point, a sudden gust scattered a swarm of glowing pages around them, each fragment a twisted sentence or broken line. Ilara reached out, catching a page that shimmered with a phrase in delicate script. "The narrative is unbound. The teller must choose." Her heart pounded. The choice was hers. In the chamber's shadowed heart, they confronted the ivory-masked symbols of the cult's enduring influence. The air thickened with the weight of centuries of control and obsession. Ilara's fingers trembled as she placed the rewritten cipher on the altar-like pedestal, the ink still alive with the glow of possibility. "This is it," she breathed. "The final page. A pulse of energy rippled through the room, the rewriting books around them convulsing in a crescendo of chaotic light. The library teetered on the edge of collapse, stories and histories fracturing and converging in a dizzying dance. "Now," Elara whispered, eyes fixed on the glowing text, "we break the cycle." As she began to read aloud the altered cipher, the walls around them quivered, the words in the books aligning in a fragile harmony. The narrative, once unbound and wild, started to coalesce, tethered by Ilara's will and the combined resolve of her allies. Yet, even as order returned, a lingering uncertainty hung in the air. The library had been changed forever, and so had she. The final question loomed. Could she truly control a story so vast and ancient? Or had she only delayed the inevitable unraveling? The answer was unwritten. But Elara Whitlock was no longer bound to be a mere character in the tale. She was the author of her fate, wielding the pen with trembling hands and a resolute heart. And the last page had yet to be written. Its edges were worn, the stitching frayed, but the embossed initial ZW gleamed faintly beneath the dim glow of her flashlight. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the faded letters, a sudden, unspoken connection binding her to the past she had so long sought to understand. Each page whispered secrets in the soft crackle of brittle parchment. The handwriting, elegant yet hurried, belonged unmistakably to her mother. As Elara read, the dense silence of the room was punctuated only by the distant rustle of shifting books and the occasional drip of water from the ancient stone walls. Her mother's words unfolded a tapestry of hidden truths. The Ivory cult was not merely an external menace, but a shadow entwined with her very bloodline. The diary recounted clandestine meetings beneath the vaulted arches of the university, where her parent scholars and secret resistors had gathered to challenge the cult's deterministic grip on history. They spoke of narrative control as both weapon and prison, their voices hushed with the weight of forbidden knowledge. Elara's heart pounded as she absorbed the sacrifices made to protect her, including the painful choice that led to their disappearance. In the quiet study room that evening, Elara read aloud passages that revealed the cult's origins entwined with myth and scholarly obsession. Her voice wavered with reverence, the shadows of her parents' fight casting long echoes across the walls. Professor Alden Gray, seated nearby, listened with an inscrutable expression, his piercing blue eyes reflecting both sorrow and a cautious hope. They were more than victims, Elara whispered. They were part of the resistance, trying to rewrite the story before it could be sealed. Professor Gray nodded slowly. Their courage is why you are here now. But the fight is far from over. Memories flooded back vivid flashes of her childhood, the veiled warnings, the subtle tension in her relatives' eyes. The ivory mask that once sat on her father's desk now seemed a symbol of both menace and protection. As the rain pattered against the stained glass windows, Elara felt the turbulent mix of grief and determination swell within her. She rose, moving to the window, watching the storm ripple across the campus. The past, with all its shadows and secrets, had finally become a beacon. Her parents' legacy was no longer a burden but a call to arms. To break the cycle, to reclaim the narrative, she must embrace the full weight of her heritage. The library around her seemed to pulse with renewed life, the rewriting texts momentarily still as if awaiting her next move. Elara's gaze hardened with resolve. The final chapter was yet to be written, and she would be its author. As the storm raged outside, inside the library, a fragile hope took root, one that would either shatter the cult's hold forever or consume her in the unforgiving tide of fate. With a deep breath, Elara closed the diary and turned toward the labyrinthine shelves, ready to face whatever shadows lurked ahead. The echoes of the past had spoken. Now it was time to shape the future. As Elara Whitlock stood in the heart of the ancient building, she was surrounded by the trembling skeleton of knowledge itself. Shelves groaned under the weight of centuries, their foundations quivering. Dust motes swirling in the faint shafts of waning sunlight that filtered through stained glass windows, clouded by neglect. The very air seemed charged, thick with the echo of countless rewritten stories, desperate to be heard. Alara's breath caught, a sharp intake that echoed against the stone walls. Around her, the book's whispered pages fluttering like wounded birds, their inked voices fragmented and desperate. She could feel the pulse of the library, the slow unraveling of its carefully woven narrative fabric, stretched thin by the defiance she and her allies had wrought. "It's happening faster than I feared," Mina Solis murmured, her voice low, steady but trembling with suppressed fear. She crouched beside Elara, one arm steadying her friend while the other clutched a battered notebook filled with hastily scribbled cipher notes. Mina's curly auburn hair caught the waning light, shimmering like embers against the shadowed backdrop of the restricted archives. Elara forced herself to stand upright, pushing back the wave of exhaustion and pain that radiated from a fresh bruise along her. Ribs a souvenir from their last confrontation with the Ivory cult's enforcers. "We broke the cycle," she whispered, a bittersweet note threading through her voice. "But at what cost?" The walls shuddered again, a deeper, more insistent tremor that sent a cascade of dust into the air. Somewhere in the distance, the anguished creak of a collapsing bookshelf echoed like a death knell. Professor Alden Gray appeared silently, as if summoned by the chaos. His tall, gaunt frame seemed almost ethereal amidst the swirling debris, his silver hair disheveled, eyes sunken but burning with a somber light. Without preamble, he reached out and touched a crumbling manuscript resting on a nearby pedestal. The brittle pages fluttered uncontrollably, their inked words distorting and dispersing like smoke. "The price," he said quietly, voice grave, "was always going to be high. The library does not forgive those who seek to alter its course without sacrifice." Elara listened, a knot tightening in her chest. "What do you mean? What sacrifice?" Gray's gaze settled on her, a mixture of regret and resolve etched into the lines of his face. The curse of the Ivory cult was not just control over fate, it was a tether binding the library's essence to a deterministic narrative, breaking free fractures that tether some will be lost to the unraveling. Some parts of history, and ourselves, will be erased or altered beyond recall. Mina's grip tightened on Elara's arm. "Are you saying we might lose each other? Or worse," Gray whispered, "lose pieces of our very selves?" A sudden, cold presence filled the room. Librarian Marlowe emerged from the shadows, his ivory mask held loosely in one hand, his face pale and unreadable beneath the dim light. His eyes, dark and fathomless, locked onto Alaris with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "You have set in motion events that cannot be undone," he intoned, voice low and resonant. "The library's reality is no longer stable. The rules have changed. Freedom is not without consequence." Elara swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling like lead in her stomach. "What does that mean for us, for the future?" Marlowe's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "It means the story is yours to write, but the pen may cut deeper than you expect." The room seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, the very air crackling with tension as books fell silent, their restless pages finally stilled. Elara felt the fragile hope flickering within her promise that the future was unwritten, yet tempered by the grim reality that the cost of freedom was steep and uncertain. She turned to Mina and Gray, their faces reflecting the same mix of fear and determination. "We cannot turn back," Ilara said firmly, voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "We fight on not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Because the price of freedom, however high, is worth paying." As the library trembled around them, Ilara understood that their battle had only just begun. The fabric of reality was frayed, and the path ahead was shadowed and treacherous. But within the chaos, there was a spark of fragile hope that the stories of tomorrow could be their own. And with that thought, Ilara stepped forward into the uncertain dawn, ready to face whatever cost awaited them. The air was thick with dust and the scent of old parchment as Ilara and her allies moved cautiously through the deepest sections of the library. The walls seemed to breathe, their stone surfaces subtly shifting in the dim light. Every step echoed like a heartbeat, a reminder of the fragile balance they had disturbed. Mina's voice broke the silence, whispering urgently, "The cipher's broken the pattern, but the library fights back. Every page we read, every secret we uncover, it's like the building is trying to rewrite us out." Ilara nodded, her gaze fixed on a shattered tome lying open on the floor. The words on its pages were fragmented, letters fading and reappearing as if the book itself was struggling to hold on to its story. "We've already lost so much," Ila murmured. "Memories, people, pieces of ourselves. But this is the only way." Professor Gray's voice was a steady anchor amid the chaos. The Ivory cult believed that history was immutable, that fate was sealed in ink. But you've proven otherwise. The library's reality is a living narrative, and you've begun to rewrite it. Suddenly, a distant crash shook the floor beneath their feet. The sound of a collapsing bookshelf sent a shockwave of panic through the group. Ilara's heart raced as she helped Mina steady herself. "We need to keep moving," Gray urged. "The longer the instability continues, the more unpredictable the consequences will be." Their path led them toward the heart of the library, where ancient mechanisms once used to control the rewriting books lay hidden beneath layers of dust and secrecy. Ilara's fingers trembled as she traced the intricate engravings on a brass panel, feeling the weight of history and the burden of change. "Is this the source?" Mina asked, eyes wide. "Possibly," Ilara replied. "If we can understand how this works, maybe we can stabilize the library or at least protect what remains of our reality." As they worked, the library's whispers grew louder, a cacophony of fragmented stories and half-remembered truths swirling around them. Ilara felt a cold presence behind her and turned sharply to see librarian Marlowe watching silently, his expression unreadable. "You tamper with forces beyond your comprehension," he warned. "The library demands balance. For every action, there is a price." Ilara met his gaze defiantly. "We accept that price, because living under your control is the greater cost." Marlowe's lips twitched into a ghost of a smile before he vanished into the shadows, leaving Ilara and her allies alone amid the crumbling sanctum of knowledge. Hours passed like minutes as they toiled to decipher the mechanisms and reconfigure the ancient scripts. Exhaustion gnawed at their resolve, but the vision of a future free from the cult's grasp propelled them onward. When the final sequence was set, Ilara hesitated, feeling the weight of 1,000 unwritten stories pressing upon her. With a deep breath, she triggered the mechanism. A surge of energy rippled through the library. The walls shuddered violently, and the dust rose in towering spirals. Books flew open, their pages flipping wildly as if caught in a storm of words. The air crackled with raw power, the very narrative of the library bending and breaking. Ilara clung to Mina's hand, heart pounding as the ground shifted beneath them. When the chaos finally subsided, the silence that followed was profound, an unspoken acknowledgement of what had been lost and what had been gained. In the aftermath, Alara knew that the library would never be the same. Some stories were lost forever. Some memories faded like ink in rain. But the cage was broken, and the future was, at last, theirs too, right? Yet, as she gazed into the uncertain horizon, a shadow of doubt lingered. The Ivory cult's legacy was not so easily erased, and the true price of freedom had yet to be fully revealed. Alara tightened her grip on her notebook, determination blazing anew. This is only the beginning, she vowed. And whatever comes next, we face it together. The library held its breath, and so did she. Alara Whitlock sat at the ancient oak table, her fingers lightly tracing the smooth surface as if grounding herself to the present. Around her, the books lay still, their pages no longer fluttering or shifting under unseen hands. The rewriting had ceased. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the narratives held steady, their stories fixed in place. She exhaled slowly, the breath trembling with a complex mixture of relief and lingering tension. The weight of what they had endured pressed upon her chest, the relentless chase through cryptic ciphers, the shadow of the Ivory cult hovering just beyond reach, the dizzying distortion of time and story. Yet now, in this fragile stillness, a seed of hope took root. The faint rustle of footsteps broke the quiet. Mina Solis appeared in the doorway, a small stack of recovered manuscripts clutched carefully in her arms. Her auburn curls caught the low light as she approached, eyes bright and eager despite the exhaustion etched into her youthful face. Alara, Mina said softly, setting the papers down with a reverence that mirrored her friend's own. Look what I found tucked away in the restricted archives. Some of the original texts before the rewriting began. Alara leaned forward, her glasses catching the lamplight as she scanned the fragile pages. Each word was a testament to stories unaltered by dark designs, a glimpse of truth preserved against time's erosion. This could be the key to rebuilding what was lost. She murmured, her voice steady yet filled with wonder. Mina smiled, a spark of courage rekindled. We're not just survivors, Alara. We're the authors now. As they spoke, a tall figure emerged from the shadowed stacks, Professor Alden Gray. His silver hair shimmered faintly, his piercing blue eyes fixed with a steadiness that had grown rare in recent weeks. He approached the table with a measured gait, the weight of his own secrets evident but tempered by a newfound calm. You've done well, he said quietly, his voice carrying the gravitas of years spent guarding the library's mysteries. The cessation of the rewriting is no small victory. Alara met his gaze, searching for the mentor she once trusted, and found a man both wiser and wearier. Is it truly over? She asked, the question heavy with uncertainty. Gray's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. The cycle is broken, but the story continues. Control has loosened, but the future remains unwritten. The grand clock above them told midnight, its deep chimes reverberating through the cavernous halls. Alara's eyes drifted upward, watching the hands move inexorably forward, a tangible reminder that time marched on, indifferent to their struggles. She thought of the countless pages that had predicted her demise, the cryptic messages that had bound her fate so tightly. Yet here she sat, alive and resolute, poised on the threshold of a new chapter. We have a fragile hope, Alara said, voice firm, and that is enough to keep fighting. Mina reached out, squeezing her hand. Together. Professor Gray nodded, his expression a mixture of pride and caution. Together, you may yet rewrite the narrative of your lives. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to pale the sky. a silent promise that even after the darkest night, the story moves forward. Alara looked toward the horizon, her heart a battleground of dread and unwavering hope. The ivory masks had fallen away, but the shadows they cast lingered still. She would face them, page by page, word by word, shaping a future no longer dictated by ancient cults or predestined fate. The power of stories was vast, dangerous, yes, but also liberating. And in that power, Alara found her fragile hope. As the library breathed in the quiet aftermath, so too did Alara, ready to write the next lines of her own story, uncertain but undeterred. The last page was not yet written. Alara Whitlock sat at the ancient oak table, her fingers lightly tracing the smooth surface as if grounding herself to the present. Around her, the books lay still, their pages no longer fluttering or shifting under unseen hands. The rewriting had ceased. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the narratives held steady, their stories fixed in place. She exhaled slowly, the breath trembling with a complex mixture of relief and lingering tension. The weight of what they had endured pressed upon her chest, the relentless chase through cryptic ciphers, the shadow of the ivory cult hovering just beyond reach, the dizzying distortion of time and story. Yet now, in this fragile stillness, a seed of hope took root. The faint rustle of footsteps broke the quiet. Mina Solis appeared in the doorway, a small stack of recovered manuscripts clutched carefully in her arms. Her auburn curls caught the low light as she approached, eyes bright and eager despite the exhaustion etched into her youthful face. Alara, Mina said softly, setting the papers down with a reverence that mirrored her friend's own. Look what I found tucked away in the restricted archives. Some of the original texts before the rewriting began. Alara leaned forward, her glasses catching the lamplight as she scanned the fragile pages. Each word was a testament to stories unaltered by dark designs, a glimpse of truth preserved against time's erosion. This could be the key to rebuilding what was lost. She murmured, her voice steady yet filled with wonder. Mina smiled, a spark of courage rekindled. We're not just survivors, Alara. We're the authors now. As they spoke, a tall figure emerged from the shadowed stacks, Professor Alden Gray. His silver hair shimmered faintly, his piercing blue eyes fixed with a steadiness that had grown rare in recent weeks. He approached the table with a measured gait, the weight of his own secrets evident but tempered by a newfound calm. You've done well, he said quietly, his voice carrying the gravitas of years spent guarding the library's mysteries. The cessation of the rewriting is no small victory. Alara met his gaze, searching for the mentor she once trusted, and found a man both wiser and wearier. Is it truly over? She asked, the question heavy with uncertainty. Gray's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. The cycle is broken, but the story continues. Control has loosened, but the future remains unwritten. The grand clock above them told midnight, its deep chimes reverberating through the cavernous halls. Alara's eyes drifted upward, watching the hands move inexorably forward, a tangible reminder that time marched on, indifferent to their struggles. She thought of the countless pages that had predicted her demise, the cryptic messages that had bound her fate so tightly. Yet here she sat, alive and resolute, poised on the threshold of a new chapter. We have a fragile hope, Alara said, voice firm, and that is enough to keep fighting. Mina reached out, squeezing her hand. Together. Professor Gray nodded, his expression a mixture of pride and caution. Together, you may yet rewrite the narrative of your lives. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to pale the sky. A silent promise that even after the darkest night, the story moves forward. Ilara looked toward the horizon, her heart a battleground of dread and unwavering hope. The ivory masks had fallen away, but the shadows they cast lingered still. She would face them, page by page, word by word, shaping a future no longer dictated by ancient cults or predestined fate. The power of stories was vast, dangerous, yes, but also liberating. And in that power, Ilara found her fragile hope. As the library breathed in the quiet aftermath, so too did Ilara, ready to write the next lines of her own story, uncertain but undeterred. The last page was not yet written. Ilara Whitlock sat beside Mina Solis on a bench nestled in the quiet heart of the library's restored wing. The atmosphere calm but charged with the subtle hum of renewal. For the first time in weeks, Ilara felt the heavy weight that had pressed upon her chest begin to lift, replaced by a fragile but undeniable hope. Mina's presence was a steady anchor amidst the shifting tides that had defined Ilara's recent existence. Her short, curly auburn hair caught the light as she leaned forward, eyes bright and attentive. "You've come so far, Ilara," Mina said softly, brushing a loose strand behind her ear. "The library is not the same without all that chaos." Ilara smiled faintly, adjusting her round glasses as she traced a finger along the edge of a leather-bound journal resting on her lap. "It's strange," she murmured. "For so long, everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. The books rewriting themselves, the predictions, the cult. But now, the silence feels heavier, like the calm before something else. But maybe it's just peace." Mina reached out, squeezing Ilara's hand reassuringly. "Peace is something you earned. You challenged fate itself. That's no small thing." The library around them seemed transformed. Gone were the restless whispers and shifting texts. The books sat unmoving, their pages still. Even the ancient tomes that had once threatened to alter history with every turn now lay quietly, their secrets sealed for the first time in ages. The air smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, a comforting scent that spoke of permanence and stories waiting to be told anew. Ilara stood and walked slowly toward a shelf, her gaze lingering on the empty spaces where the most volatile books had once resided. She reached into her bag and pulled out the journal, placing it gently on the shelf. Its blank pages symbolized the unwritten future, a future she now understood to be hers to shape. Mina followed, her eyes reflecting the same quiet determination. "It's not just about surviving anymore," Ilara said, her voice firmer than before. "It's about living. Writing my own story without those pages being dictated by some unseen hand." Mina nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "And you won't be alone. I'm with you every step of the way." They returned to their bench, poring over notes and plans. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and thoughtful silences. They spoke of rebuilding trust where it had been broken, of reaching out to others who might help safeguard the library's fragile new equilibrium. Ilara's mind, once tangled in paranoia and fear, now focused on possibilities, on alliances to forge, on knowledge to preserve without domination. Yet beneath this hopeful surface, a shadow of uncertainty lingered. The whispers of the Ivory cult had not entirely vanished. Rumors persisted, subtle signs that the struggle for control over narrative and fate was far from over. Ilara knew the battle might flare anew, that the fragile piece was but a chapter, not the final page. As dusk fell outside, the library's lamps cast a warm glow over the two friends. The stillness was profound, a stark contrast to the chaos that had once threatened to consume them both. Ilara breathed deeply, feeling the pulse of possibility stir within her, a reminder that while the past was written, the future remained unwritten, and with courage, it could be hers to author. She glanced at Mina, gratitude and resolve shining in her eyes. "Let's make sure this story is one worth telling." Mina smiled back, their hands clasped in silent agreement. The library, once a place of shifting secrets and dark fate, now stood as a sanctuary of new beginnings, a testament to the enduring power of hope and the unyielding strength of friendship. As the night deepened, Ilara's thoughts drifted to the days ahead. She could not predict what twists awaited, but for the first time, she believed she might write her own destiny. The last page was not yet written, and she was ready to turn it. Ilara and Mina sat huddled in a secluded corner, their whispered voices barely disturbing the thick air. Scattered across the worn oak table were cryptic notes, hastily sketched symbols, and fragments of the cipher that had haunted Ilara's thoughts for weeks. The candle flickered weakly, throwing long, wavering shadows that danced along the cracked walls, seeming to breathe with a life of their own. "Look at this," Mina murmured, pointing to a series of characters that Ilara had initially dismissed. "These aren't just random symbols. They form a pattern, almost like a signature, but one that keeps changing." Ilara leaned closer, her breath shallow, her dark eyes scanning the delicate script. "It's as if the cipher itself is alive, evolving. Just when we think we understand it, it slips through our fingers, rewriting itself." Mina's fingers trembled slightly as she traced the looping lines. "Do you think the Ivory cult still has control? Even after everything we did?" Ilara's heart clenched. The battle in the library had been fierce, the confrontation with the cult a desperate struggle to seize control of the narrative. And yet, the subtle signs, the shifting texts, the anomalies in the manuscripts hinted that their reach was not entirely severed. Before Ilara could respond, the heavy oak door creaked open. Professor Alden Gray stepped inside, his tall, gaunt figure silhouetted against the fading light. His silver hair caught the candlelight, and his piercing blue eyes locked onto Ilara with a weight that silenced the room. "I have something you need to see," he said quietly, producing a small, folded parchment from the depths of his coat. A message left behind by someone who once walked the cult's path, but chose to break away. Ilara unfolded the fragile paper, her eyes scanning the faded ink. The message was cryptic, a warning veiled in metaphor about the persistence of stories and the dangers of believing fate can be rewritten without consequence. "They're still here," Alden whispered, watching, waiting in the shadows. "The cycle isn't broken, it's only been paused." A chill ran down Ilara's spine as the reality settled in. The library itself seemed to respond. The labyrinthine stacks appeared to shift subtly, corridors stretching and contracting as if breathing. The silence was punctuated by the faint rustle of pages turning on their own and the soft echo of footsteps drifting just beyond the edge of hearing. "Do you hear that?" Mina asked, her voice barely audible. Ilara nodded, her gaze scanning the dim aisles. "We're not alone." As dusk deepened, Ilara moved toward the stained glass windows that filtered the pale light into fractured colors. Her eyes caught movement there. Just beyond the glass, a figure stood watching. The ivory mask obscured the face, but the carved symbol glowed faintly in the twilight, an inscrutable emblem of control and destiny. Ilara's breath caught. The Watchers had not vanished. They lurked still, their silent vigil a reminder that the struggle for narrative control was ongoing. Returning to Mina and Professor Gray, Ilara's voice hardened with resolve. We have to prepare. The story isn't finished, and neither are we. The night deepened around them, the library holding its secrets close. Outside, the masked figure melted into the shadows, a silent sentinel in a game whose rules were written in ink and blood. Ilara knew the path ahead would be fraught with uncertainty, but within her burned the flicker of hope, the determination to challenge the unseen forces shaping fate itself. As the candle guttered and the first whispers of dawn crept through the window panes, Ilara's thoughts raced. The Ivory cult was not defeated. They were merely biding their time, their influence woven into the very fabric of the rewriting books. But Ilara was no longer the uncertain student she had been. She was a fighter, armed with knowledge and allies, ready to face the silent watchers and carve a new narrative from the tangled threads of destiny. And yet, the question lingered, unspoken but urgent. If the cycle was not truly broken, how could they ever hope to escape the shadow of predestination? The answer, Ilara felt deep within her bones, lay hidden in the stories yet unwritten, the final pages waiting to be claimed. The library breathed around her, alive with possibility and peril. The silent watchers were watching still, but Ilara was ready to meet their gaze. Ilara and Mina sat huddled in a secluded corner, their whispered voices barely disturbing the thick air. Scattered across the worn oak table were cryptic notes, hastily sketched symbols, and fragments of the cipher that had haunted Ilara's thoughts for weeks. The candle flickered weakly, throwing long, wavering shadows that danced along the cracked walls, seeming to breathe with a life of their own. Look at this, Mina murmured, pointing to a series of characters that Ilara had initially dismissed. These aren't just random symbols. They form a pattern, almost like a signature, but one that keeps changing. Ilara leaned closer, her breath shallow, her dark eyes scanning the delicate script. It's as if the cipher itself is alive, evolving. Just when we think we understand it, it slips through our fingers, rewriting itself. Mina's fingers trembled slightly as she traced the looping lines. Do you think the Ivory cult still has control? Even after everything we did? Ilara's heart clenched. The battle in the library had been fierce, the confrontation with the cult a desperate struggle to seize control of the narrative. And yet, the subtle signs, the shifting texts, the anomalies in the manuscripts hinted that their reach was not entirely severed. Before Ilara could respond, the heavy oak door creaked open. Professor Alden Gray stepped inside, his tall, gaunt figure silhouetted against the fading light. His silver hair caught the candlelight, and his piercing blue eyes locked onto Ilara with a weight that silenced the room. I have something you need to see, he said quietly, producing a small, folded parchment from the depths of his coat. A message left behind by someone who once walked the cult's path, but chose to break away. Ilara unfolded the fragile paper, her eyes scanning the faded ink. The message was cryptic, a warning veiled in metaphor about the persistence of stories and the dangers of believing fate can be rewritten without consequence. They're still here, Alden whispered, watching, waiting in the shadows. The cycle isn't broken, it's only been paused. A chill ran down Ilara's spine as the reality settled in. The library itself seemed to respond. The labyrinthine stacks appeared to shift subtly, corridors stretching and contracting as if breathing. The silence was punctuated by the faint rustle of pages turning on their own and the soft echo of footsteps drifting just beyond the edge of hearing. Do you hear that? Mina asked, her voice barely audible. Ilara nodded, her gaze scanning the dim aisles. We're not alone. As dusk deepened, Ilara moved toward the stained glass windows that filtered the pale light into fractured colors. Her eyes caught movement there. Just beyond the glass, a figure stood watching. The ivory mask obscured the face, but the carved symbol glowed faintly in the twilight, an inscrutable emblem of control and destiny. Alara's breath caught. The Watchers had not vanished. They lurked still, their silent vigil a reminder that the struggle for narrative control was ongoing. Returning to Mina and Professor Gray, Alara's voice hardened with resolve. We have to prepare. The story isn't finished, and neither are we. The night deepened around them, the library holding its secrets close. Outside, the masked figure melted into the shadows, a silent sentinel in a game whose rules were written in ink and blood. Alara knew the path ahead would be fraught with uncertainty, but within her burned the flicker of hope, the determination to challenge the unseen forces shaping fate itself. As the candle guttered and the first whispers of dawn crept through the window panes, Alara's thoughts raced. The Ivory cult was not defeated. They were merely biding their time, their influence woven into the very fabric of the rewriting books. But Alara was no longer the uncertain student she had been. She was a fighter, armed with knowledge and allies, ready to face the silent Watchers and carve a new narrative from the tangled threads of destiny. And yet, the question lingered, unspoken but urgent. If the cycle was not truly broken, how could they ever hope to escape the shadow of predestination? The answer, Alara felt deep within her bones, lay hidden in the stories yet unwritten, the final pages waiting to be claimed. The library breathed around her, alive with possibility and peril. The silent Watchers were watching still, but Alara was ready to meet their gaze. Alara Whitlock stood alone amidst the stillness, her breath steady but her heart heavy with the weight of everything she had uncovered. Around her, the books that had so recently danced with shifting words and rewriting narratives now lay inert, their pages frozen in a final, unchanging state. The library, a place that had once seemed alive and unpredictable, now felt both eerily calm and brimming with a quiet, restless energy. She ran her fingers gently over the cover of the tome that had started. It all the ancient book containing the Ivory Cipher. The worn leather was smooth under her touch, embossed with cryptic symbols that no longer seemed to shift or shimmer. In this moment, Alara understood that the cycle had been broken, the endless rewriting of fate stilled, at least for now. Yet the future remained uncertain. The cipher had predicted her death, a fate she had fought desperately to alter. Though the outcomes still hovered in the shadows, she now held something far more precious, the fragile hope of choice. A soft voice interrupted her reverie. Alara, turning, she saw Mina Solis approaching, her auburn curls catching the fading light. Mina's presence was a bomb-steady, warm, real. I thought I might find you here, Mina said, settling beside her at the table. The library's finally quiet. Alara nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. Quiet, yes, but somehow fuller, like it's holding its breath, waiting for the next story to begin. Mina glanced around, inhaling the scent of aged paper mingled with faint traces of candle wax. Stories are powerful, she said thoughtfully. They shape us, and sometimes they shape reality. But now, maybe we can write our own. Ilara's eyes brightened at the words. That's what I've been hoping for so long. To find a way out of the cycle. To reclaim the narrative. A shadow shifted at the edge of the alcove, and Professor Alden Gray stepped forward. His tall, gaunt frame silhouetted against the dim light. His silver hair gleamed faintly, and his piercing blue eyes held a depth of knowledge and sorrow. You've come far, Alara, he said quietly, farther than many before you. The balance between fate and free will is delicate, like the thin pages of these books. Disturb it too abruptly, and all may unravel. But to choose to act, that is the true power. Ilara met his gaze steadily. And what of the forces still watching? The cult, the rewriting? He hesitated, then replied, "They are shadows, lingering where stories remain unfinished. But your actions have given the library a chance to breathe, to rest. The future is less certain now, but it is yours to write." A silence fell, profound and charged with possibility. Ilara closed the tome with a soft thud, the leather cover settling into place as though it too recognized the moment's finality. "I don't know what comes next," she admitted, "but I know I want to face it on my own terms." The library seemed to respond, its ancient walls pulsing softly with a renewed life. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed, marking the hour. The stories within these hallowed halls were no longer prisons, but pages waiting to be filled. As Ilara and Mina rose to leave, the light shifted once more, casting long shadows that stretched toward the future. The last page was not an end, but an invitation to rewrite, to hope, and to live. Yet in the quiet corners of the library, faint whispers lingered, reminders that every story has its watchers, and every choice its consequences. The narrative was unbound, but the dance between fate and free will had only just begun. Ilara stepped into the night, the cool air crisp against her skin. She carried with her the knowledge that while her destiny was no longer written in stone, the power to shape it would demand courage, wisdom, and above all, faith in the stories yet to come. And so, with her heart steady and her mind clear, Ilara Whitlock embraced the uncertain horizon, ready to write her own tale, one word at a time.